Hello there, and welcome to Physics with William, where large questions are given enough room to breathe, complicated ideas are taken one step at a time, and science is allowed to be interesting without behaving as though it has had too much coffee. Tonight we are turning our attention towards something you have carried through every moment of your life, even though you have never seen it, touched it, or placed it on a table for closer inspection. It is present while you listen to these words, while you notice the room around you, while you remember something from yesterday, and while you quietly wonder whether you are comfortable enough to remain exactly where you are. We're going to explore consciousness, beginning with the ordinary awareness that allows you to know you are here, and moving gradually towards states in which the usual sense of being a separate individual may become quieter, wider, or possibly disappear altogether. Before we begin, take a moment to notice where you are listening from tonight and what is happening around you. Perhaps the room is dark, perhaps a lamp is still on, or perhaps you are listening during the day and hoping that a calm discussion about consciousness will make an otherwise busy afternoon slightly more manageable. What sounds can you hear in the background? Can you feel the surface supporting your body? Are your eyes open or closed? Most importantly, can you notice that you're aware of these things? The sounds may change, your position may shift, and your thoughts may wander, but something continues to register what is happening. That simple fact is so familiar that it rarely receives much attention. We spend our lives noticing objects, people, problems, plans, and occasionally the alarming speed at which biscuits disappear from a plate. But we seldom stop to examine the awareness in which all of those experiences occur. If you find this journey calming, useful, or pleasantly strange, you may like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps this quiet space reach other people who enjoy following scientific questions without being chased through them at high speed. You can also leave a comment saying where you are listening from and which state of consciousness you find most mysterious. Some people are fascinated by dreams, others by meditation, and a surprising number are mainly interested in understanding why they can walk into a room and immediately forget what they went there to do. Memory will have its moment, but first we need to look at the basic mystery beneath every memory, sensation, and thought. We need to ask what it means to be aware at all. Consciousness is difficult to define because it includes everything you experience and yet does not seem to be any single part of experience. You can be conscious of a sound, a colour, a thought, an emotion, or a pain in your shoulder. You can be conscious of your breathing, your surroundings, and the fact that you're thinking about consciousness. Every one of these is different, but they all share the same basic feature. There is something it is like to experience them. A camera can register light, a microphone can record sound, and a computer can process enormous amounts of information, but none of these abilities automatically prove that there is an inner point of view. Your brain also processes information, yet in your case there appears to be an experienced world. You do not merely receive signals from the eyes, you see a room. You do not merely detect vibrations in the air, you hear a voice. You do not merely store information about earlier events, you remember them as part of your own life. This difference between processing information and experiencing it is at the center of the scientific problem. Neuroscience can observe activity in the brain while a person sees an image, hears music, feels pain, makes a decision, or remembers a familiar face. Researchers can identify networks that become more active during attention, regions involved in processing the body, and patterns associated with sleep, dreaming, anesthesia, and meditation. These discoveries are important because they show that conscious experience is closely connected with the condition of the brain. Damage to one area may affect vision. Damage to another may change memory, language, or the ability to recognize familiar objects. Certain drugs can alter the sense of time, space, identity, and meaning. Sleep can remove the waking world entirely and replace it with a dream that feels real until the moment it ends. Even with all of this information, one question remains unusually difficult. Why should physical activity in the brain produce an inner experience? A scientist may record the activity associated with seeing red, but the recording does not contain redness. It contains measurements. Another person can study the data, compare it with previous experiments, and describe the relevant brain processes, but only the person having the experience knows what that particular red looks like from the inside. The same problem appears with pain. A doctor can measure nerve signals, observe changes in brain activity, and ask a patient to rate the intensity, but the pain itself belongs to the patient's experience. It cannot be removed from that point of view and handed to someone else for examination, which is fortunate for the person receiving it, but inconvenient for anyone hoping to build a complete theory. Philosophers sometimes describe this as the difference between objective and subjective knowledge. Objective knowledge concerns things that can be observed, measured, and compared by different people. Subjective knowledge concerns what an experience feels like to the person having it. Science has become extremely effective at studying the objective world, but consciousness includes an unavoidable subjective side. A complete explanation would need to connect these two descriptions. It would need to explain how patterns of electrical and chemical activity become the smell of coffee, the sound of rain, the feeling of embarrassment, or the private recognition that you have forgotten someone's name halfway through introducing them. One common answer is that consciousness is produced by the brain. According to this view, the brain is a physical system, and when its activity reaches the right level of complexity and organization, conscious experience appears. The details are still debated, but the basic idea fits a large amount of evidence. Change the brain and experience changes. Reduce certain forms of brain activity through anesthesia and consciousness may disappear. Restore normal activity and the person wakes. From this perspective, consciousness depends on the brain in much the same way that digestion depends on the digestive system, although digestion has been considerably more cooperative about revealing how it works. Other thinkers argue that this answer may be incomplete. They point out that showing a connection between the brain and consciousness does not necessarily explain the ultimate nature of consciousness. A radio depends on its circuits to produce clear sound, but the music is not created by the radio station inside the box. Some philosophers and spiritual traditions use a similar comparison and suggest that the brain may shape, limit, or receive consciousness rather than produce it entirely. The comparison is only an idea, not proof. There is no established evidence that the brain receives consciousness from an external source, and the theory creates new questions about where this wider consciousness would exist and how it would interact with matter. Still, the proposal remains attractive to people who believe awareness may be a fundamental feature of reality, rather than a late product of biological evolution. A third group of ideas attempts to avoid choosing between mind and matter in the usual way. Some philosophers suggest that consciousness and physical reality may be two aspects of a deeper process. Others propose that simple forms of experience could exist throughout nature, becoming richer and more organized in complex living systems. These views remain controversial because they are difficult to test, but they show how unusual the problem is. With most scientific questions, researchers disagree about the correct explanation. With consciousness, they often disagree about what kind of thing an explanation should be. The confusion becomes easier to understand when you examine your own experience. Right now, you probably feel that there is a central person listening to these words. This person has a name, a body, a history, preferences, responsibilities, and a collection of opinions about matters that range from deeply important to whether pineapple belongs on pizza. The sense of being this individual appears stable. You woke as yourself, you have remained yourself throughout the day, and you expect to be the same person tomorrow. The contents of your mind change, but the owner of those contents seems to remain. Neuroscience has not found a single location where this owner sits. There is no small observer inside the head watching a screen and directing the rest of the brain. If such an observer existed, we would immediately need to ask who was observing inside the observer, and the investigation would become crowded rather quickly. Instead, The sense of self appears to be created by many systems working together. The brain combines signals from the body, information from the senses, memories from the past, expectations about the future, and the continuous monitoring of thoughts and emotions. This produces a useful model of a person located in a body and moving through a world. The model is highly practical. It helps you distinguish your hand from the table, your memories from another person's memories, and your responsibilities from the responsibilities of someone sitting 3 seats away on a train. It allows you to make plans, protect the body, maintain relationships, and learn from previous events. Without a stable sense of self, ordinary life would become difficult. Even deciding which coat to take home from a restaurant would require a surprising amount of philosophical work. Useful models, however, are not always complete descriptions of reality. A map helps you find a road, but it does not contain the road itself. A photograph captures an appearance, but it is not the person it shows. In a similar way, the personal self may be an organized representation created by the brain rather than a permanent object hidden somewhere inside it. This does not make the self false or meaningless. It means that the feeling of being a single, continuous individual may depend on processes that can change. Evidence for this appears in ordinary life. When you become deeply absorbed in an activity, the sense of self may fade into the background. A musician may become so involved in playing that there is little awareness of time or personal concern. An athlete may act without consciously describing each movement. A reader may become so absorbed in a story that the room briefly disappears from attention. The person has not vanished physically, but the brain is no longer devoting the same resources to maintaining self-focused thought. The opposite can also happen. Anxiety may make the sense of self extremely strong. Attention narrows around personal danger, possible embarrassment, or the need to control what happens next. Thoughts repeat. The body becomes tense. Every event is interpreted in relation to what it means for you. The world may feel smaller because the self is taking up most of the available space. Meditation practices often work with this flexible quality of identity. Rather than trying to destroy the self, they train attention to observe thoughts, sensations, and emotions as temporary events. A thought appears, remains briefly, and changes. A feeling rises, affects the body, and later fades. The practitioner learns to notice these processes without immediately treating each one as a complete statement of who they are. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," they may recognize that anxiety is present. The difference is subtle in language but significant in experience. One description turns the emotion into an identity. The other treats it as a condition being observed. This brings us to the idea of the quiet witness. The phrase refers to the basic awareness that seems to notice experience without being identical to any particular part of it. Your thoughts change, but you are aware of them changing. Your emotions change, but you can notice the difference between calm, irritation, sadness, and relief. Sensations move through the body, attention shifts, and memories appear without warning. Through all of these changes, there remains the capacity to know that something is happening. It is important not to turn the quiet witness into another imaginary person inside the mind. It is not a hidden character sitting behind your thoughts and making notes. The phrase simply points toward the distinction between an experience and the awareness of that experience. A thought has content. Awareness knows that the thought is present. A sound has pitch, volume, and location. Awareness registers the sound. An emotion has bodily effects and personal meaning. Awareness allows those features to be experienced. Whether this awareness can exist independently of brain activity is a separate question. The fact that you can notice thoughts does not prove that consciousness comes from a universal field, survives the body, or exists beyond matter. It only shows that experience contains different layers. There is the object being noticed, the mental interpretation of it, and the awareness in which both appear. The 7 levels we are going to explore describe changes in how these layers relate to one another. The sequence begins with deep sleep, where the usual world and the usual self are absent. It moves into dreaming, where the mind creates a world and accepts it as real. Ordinary waking awareness follows, organizing perception around a body and a personal identity. The later states are drawn mainly from contemplative and spiritual traditions. They describe awareness becoming less dependent on thought, less confined to the individual self, and eventually experienced as inseparable from everything else. These later descriptions should be approached with interest and caution. They are not standard medical stages in the way that sleep stages are. A brain researcher can measure rapid eye movements, changes in electrical activity, breathing, muscle tone, and responses to stimulation. States such as cosmic consciousness or unity consciousness are based largely on first-person reports, philosophical systems, and long traditions of meditation. Different traditions use different terms, and people may interpret similar experiences in very different ways. A person who feels less separate from the world might describe a spiritual realization. A neuroscientist might describe a temporary change in networks involved in self-processing. A psychologist might examine attention, emotion, and the construction of identity. These explanations do not automatically cancel one another. They may describe different aspects of the same event, although they may also make claims that cannot all be true in the same way. The most reliable approach is to keep asking clear questions. What changes in the person's experience? What changes in the brain? Does the state last for seconds, hours, or years? Does it improve attention, emotional stability, and compassion? Or does it create confusion and detachment? Can the person function normally? Are the claims supported by evidence, or are they interpretations added afterward? These questions matter because unusual experiences are not always signs of deeper understanding. Exhaustion, trauma, illness, drugs, and neurological conditions can all alter the sense of self. A person may feel detached from the body, or convinced that ordinary reality has disappeared. Such experiences can be frightening and may require professional support. Spiritual language should not be used to dismiss distress, and scientific language should not be used to dismiss every meaningful experience. Clarity includes knowing the difference between a helpful change in perspective and a condition that makes life harder to manage. The progression through 7 levels is best treated as a guide for inquiry rather than a rigid ladder. Human consciousness does not always move in neat steps. We pass between alertness, distraction, imagination, emotion, sleep, and dreams every day. Meditation may create moments of unusual quiet without producing a permanent transformation. A powerful experience of connection may occur during nature, music, prayer, grief, or love without fitting perfectly into a traditional category. Even so, the sequence gives us a useful structure because each state changes the role of the self. In deep sleep, the self appears to be absent. In dreaming, a self appears inside a world created by the brain. In waking life, the self is tied closely to the body and the shared environment. In transcendental consciousness, awareness is described as remaining present while thought becomes quiet. In cosmic consciousness, that awareness is said to continue through ordinary activity. In God consciousness, the world is experienced with an intense sense of intelligence, beauty, or sacred meaning. In unity consciousness, the division between observer and observed is said to dissolve. The language becomes more difficult as the sense of separation decreases. Ordinary speech depends on subjects and objects. Someone sees something. A person experiences a world. An observer notices a thought. When people report a state without a clear separation between the observer and what is observed, language begins to struggle. They may say that everything was one, that awareness knew itself, or that existence was conscious of its own presence. These statements can sound vague because grammar is designed for a world of separate things. Our task will be to translate such descriptions into clear questions without removing their meaning. We will ask whether the experience could result from changes in attention, prediction, body awareness, and self-related brain activity. We will also consider whether a change in consciousness can reveal something important about reality, rather than merely creating a different feeling inside the mind. That distinction is essential. An experience may feel convincing without being factually correct. Dreams prove this every night. A person can be completely certain that they're standing in a railway station, speaking to a childhood teacher, while a purple horse waits beside the ticket machine. The scene feels real until waking changes the conditions under which reality is judged. Certainty alone is not evidence. At the same time, waking perception is also constructed by the brain. Light reaches the eyes, sound reaches the ears, and signals arrive from the body. The brain organizes this information into a stable world. Color is created from the processing of light. Sound is created from the processing of vibration. The feeling of a solid, continuous present is assembled from information arriving at slightly different times. You do not experience raw reality. You experience the brain's best working model of what is happening. This model is usually dependable because it is constrained by the environment. Other people can confirm that a table is present. You can walk around it, touch it, measure it, and discover that it remains in place even when you stop paying attention. Waking reality is shared and consistent in ways that dreams are not. Still, both waking and dreaming demonstrate that consciousness never meets the world without interpretation. That fact becomes especially important when we ask whether the individual self is also part of the model. The brain may be constructing not only the room, the sounds, and the objects, but also the feeling of being the person located at the center of them. The self may be the brain's most useful prediction, an organizing point that brings perception, memory, and action together. You can test a small part of this idea without doing anything unusual. Notice a thought as it appears. You may find that you did not choose the exact moment it arrived. Perhaps it is a comment about these words, a memory, an image, or a plan for later. The thought presents itself, and only afterward does the mind often claim ownership by saying, "I thought that." Now notice a sound. You do not need to create awareness of it through effort. If the sound is loud enough and your hearing is functioning, it enters experience. The same is true of many sensations and emotions. They appear before a separate decision is made to experience them. This does not mean that choice is unreal, or that people lack responsibility. It means that much of mental life begins outside conscious control. The quiet witness is the part of experience that notices these events after they arise. Learning to recognize this can create a little distance from the constant movement of the mind. A thought can be important without being an order. An emotion can be strong without defining the whole person. A memory can return without requiring you to live inside it again. For now, there is no need to force the mind into silence or search for an extraordinary state. Simply notice that experience is already changing on its own. Sounds come and go. Breathing continues. The body makes small adjustments. Attention moves between the voice, the room, and private thoughts. Awareness does not need to hold any one of these in place. As the body becomes tired, another change begins. Attention grows less stable. The outside world starts to lose its grip. Thoughts become less organized and may combine in unusual ways. The sense of time weakens. The person who spent the day making decisions, protecting opinions, remembering obligations, and searching for missing objects begins to withdraw from experience. The transition happens so regularly that it seems ordinary, but it is one of the most dramatic changes consciousness undergoes. Within a short period, the waking world can disappear completely. The body remains in the room, the brain continues its work, and life goes on. Yet the familiar self may no longer be present to witness any of it. This is where the investigation becomes more difficult, because the first state we need to examine is defined largely by what cannot be remembered after it has passed. Each night, the familiar person you have been throughout the day begins to disappear. It usually happens without drama. You may be reading, listening to something, or thinking through tomorrow's plans when the words start losing their shape. A sentence reaches your eyes, but not quite your understanding. Thoughts that seemed important a few minutes earlier become less organized, and strange combinations begin to appear. You may briefly imagine a train inside a kitchen, or remember a conversation that never happened. The room remains where it was, your body remains on the bed, and the clock continues moving forward, but the mind is gradually releasing its grip on the waking world. The person who answered messages, made decisions, worried about unfinished work, and formed several strong opinions about the correct temperature of the room is becoming less available. Sleep is not a single condition that begins when the eyes close and ends when the alarm rings. The brain moves through a repeating sequence of states, each with its own pattern of activity. The earlier stage is light and unstable. Sounds from the room may still enter awareness, muscles may twitch, and a person can wake easily. Sometimes there is a sudden sensation of falling, followed by a quick movement of the body. This is common and usually harmless, although it can make the quiet process of going to sleep feel as though the bed has briefly failed an important safety inspection. As sleep becomes more established, awareness of the surroundings decreases. The brain begins to block more sensory information, the heart rate slows, body temperature falls, and the muscles relax further. Eventually, the sleeper enters the deepest form of non-rapid eye movement sleep, often called slow-wave sleep. The name comes from the large, slow patterns recorded in the brain during this state. While a waking brain shows many regions carrying out different tasks at the same time, the brain in deep sleep becomes more synchronized. Large groups of nerve cells move between periods of activity and relative quiet together. This coordinated rhythm changes how information travels across the brain. Regions that normally communicate to create a stable and detailed conscious world become less able to exchange information in the flexible way they do while you're awake. The brain is not turned off during deep sleep. It remains active, but its priorities have changed. The body continues breathing, the heart continues beating, and the systems that control temperature, hormones, and basic survival remain at work. The brain also carries out processes connected with memory, recovery, and physical maintenance. Deep sleep is especially important for restoring the body and supporting the immune system. Growth hormone is released, tissues are repaired, and energy use is adjusted. The brain appears to strengthen some memories while reducing unnecessary connections, helping important information remain useful, without preserving every small detail of the day. This is probably for the best, since remembering the exact position of every spoon you saw would make breakfast much more demanding than necessary. Something else happens during deep sleep that is central to our investigation. The ordinary sense of self disappears. There is usually no experience of lying in a particular room. There is no awareness of a name, a history, a body, or a list of responsibilities waiting for the morning. You do not spend deep sleep thinking that you are currently unconscious. You do not notice the absence of thought, because there is no active observer commenting on it. The personal narrator that follows you through waking life is silent. From the outside, the sleeper is clearly present. Another person can see the body, hear the breathing, and measure the activity of the brain. From the inside, there may be no reportable experience at all. When people are awakened from deep sleep, they often say that they were not experiencing anything. They may feel confused for a few moments and need time to recognize where they are. The mind must rebuild its model of the room, the time, and the person who has just opened their eyes. This temporary difficulty is known as sleep inertia, and it explains why someone awakened suddenly may stare at an alarm clock as if it has arrived from another civilization. Within moments, the familiar identity returns. The sleeper recognizes the room, remembers the day, notices the body, and becomes aware of what needs to happen next. The self appears to come back online. This process is so quick and so common that it's easy to overlook what it reveals. The feeling of being a continuous person does not require continuous conscious awareness. The waking self can disappear for hours, yet the brain preserves enough information to reconstruct it when the conditions change. Your memories, habits, language, preferences, and personality do not need to remain active in consciousness throughout the night. They are stored in patterns of connection and activity within the nervous system. When waking returns, these patterns become available again, and the person you recognize as yourself reappears. The continuity of identity is therefore not the same as an unbroken stream of awareness. It is more like a process that can pause and restart while preserving its structure. This is one reason deep sleep creates a challenge for the idea of a permanent inner observer. During waking life, it feels as though there is someone inside who is always present, watching thoughts and experiences as they pass. Yet that observer cannot usually be found during deep sleep. The body survives perfectly well without a conscious manager. Breathing continues, the heart adjusts, the brain maintains internal conditions, and the sleeping person changes position without making a detailed plan. The sense of self may be essential for navigating waking life, but deep sleep shows that it is not essential for life itself. It appears when the brain needs to organize perception, memory, and action around a body moving through an environment. When those tasks are reduced, the self can fade. This does not mean the self is false. It means that it may be a function rather than a permanent object. It is something the brain does, not something hidden inside the brain. A similar pattern appears in other states. Under general anesthesia, the sense of self and the external world can disappear. During certain seizures or injuries, consciousness may be interrupted. In deep meditation, the personal narrative may become unusually quiet while awareness remains clear. These conditions are not the same, but they demonstrate that the relationship between awareness and identity can change. The self feels stable, because it is usually reconstructed in a consistent way, yet it depends on biological processes that can be altered. Deep sleep also changes the experience of time. Imagine falling asleep at midnight and waking at 7 in the morning. A clock records 7 hours. The earth rotates, the room changes temperature, and the body moves through several cycles of sleep. From the sleeper's point of view, however, midnight may seem to be followed almost immediately by morning. There is no felt interval. Time has passed physically, but it has not been experienced psychologically. This sense of time depends on change being noticed and remembered. During waking life, the brain tracks events, compares what is happening with what happened before, and creates a sequence. When few events occur, time may feel slow. When attention is absorbed, time may feel fast. During deep sleep, the system that constructs this sequence is largely unavailable. Without a remembered series of events, there is no felt duration. This creates an unusual gap in personal life. Every night, hours vanish from subjective experience. You accept that they occurred because clocks, other people, and the condition of your body provide evidence. You may have gone to bed tired and awakened rested. The light outside may have changed. A pet may have moved to a different part of the bed while somehow continuing to occupy most of it. Yet you do not possess a continuous record of the interval. The missing time raises a difficult question. Was consciousness completely absent? Or was there some form of awareness that left no memory? Scientists cannot answer this simply by asking people what they experienced, because every report depends on memory. If a person experienced something during deep sleep but failed to store it, the later report would still be that nothing happened. The absence of memory does not necessarily prove the absence of experience. Researchers have addressed this by waking people at different points during sleep and asking immediately whether anything was present. Reports from deep sleep are usually less detailed than reports from dreaming. Many people describe nothing at all, while others mention a vague sensation, a simple thought, or a brief image. These findings suggest that deep sleep is not always completely empty. The brain moves through changing conditions, and even slow-wave sleep may contain short periods of limited experience. Still, rich and organized consciousness is much less common in deep sleep. There is usually no stable world, no clear story, and no active personal identity. Whatever remains is faint, fragmented, or difficult to remember. This makes deep sleep useful for studying the minimum conditions needed for conscious experience. Several scientific theories attempt to explain why consciousness fades during deep sleep. One group of theories focuses on communication across the brain. Conscious experience may require distant regions to share information rapidly and flexibly. A sight, sound, memory, or emotion becomes conscious when information about it is made available across a wide network involved in attention, planning, language, and decision-making. During deep sleep, this broad communication becomes less effective. Activity may remain strong within individual regions, but the regions are less able to combine their work into a single, detailed experience. Another approach proposes that consciousness depends on the brain's ability to integrate information while still maintaining differences between its parts. A conscious state contains many distinct features, but they are experienced together. You can see a room, hear a voice, feel the bed, and remember your name as parts of one moment. During deep sleep, the brain's slow synchronized activity may reduce this balance. Large groups of cells act together, but the system becomes less differentiated and less able to form a complex experience. These theories help explain why consciousness becomes less likely during deep sleep, but they do not fully explain why any pattern of brain activity should feel like something from the inside. They describe the conditions under which experience appears, disappears, or changes. The central mystery remains. Why does integrated information become a world that is seen, heard, felt, and known? Philosophical and spiritual traditions approach deep sleep from another direction. Rather than asking only what the brain is doing, they ask whether awareness itself disappears when mental activity stops. Some traditions claim that deep sleep is not a complete absence of consciousness. They suggest that awareness remains present without thoughts, sensations, memories, or a personal observer. This idea is difficult to understand because ordinary awareness is always awareness of something. You are aware of a sound, an image, a feeling, or a thought. If all objects of experience disappear, it seems natural to say that awareness has disappeared as well. The alternative is that awareness can exist without content, like an empty space in which nothing particular is occurring. A common comparison is a screen. During waking life, the screen displays the shared world of sensory experience. During dreaming, it displays a private world created largely by the brain. During deep sleep, the images vanish. One interpretation says the screen has switched off. Another says the screen remains present but empty. The comparison has limits. There is no evidence of a literal screen inside the mind, and consciousness may not exist separately from the brain. The purpose of the comparison is to distinguish between awareness and the contents that appear within it. If every image on a screen disappears, the screen itself does not necessarily disappear. The philosophical question is whether consciousness behaves in a similar way. Some traditions point to the statement people often make after sleeping deeply. They say that they slept well and knew nothing. The phrase seems ordinary, but it contains a puzzle. How can someone know that there was nothing to know? One answer is that the mind simply notices a gap after waking. It remembers going to sleep, remembers waking, and infers that nothing was experienced between those points. This explanation is reasonable and consistent with what we know about memory. Another answer is that a basic awareness was present during deep sleep, and later recognized the absence of mental activity. According to this view, the person did not experience objects, but there was still an underlying condition of awareness. When waking returned, the mind translated that condition into the memory of peaceful, dreamless sleep. There is no simple experiment that can confirm this claim. Any measurement records the brain from the outside, while the claim concerns experience from the inside. If awareness contains no thoughts, images, or memories, it would leave little evidence behind. the very quality that defines the state would also make it difficult to study. Some experienced meditators report remaining aware while the body enters deep sleep. They describe noticing the senses fade, the body disappear from attention, and thought becomes silent while a basic clarity remains. This is sometimes called witnessing sleep. The person says that the body slept while awareness continued without ordinary content. Scientific studies of these reports are limited. Meditation can change attention, sleep patterns, and the ability to remember brief experiences near the edges of sleep. A trained practitioner may notice moments that most people pass through without awareness. It is also possible that the reported state occurs during a lighter stage of sleep or during a short period of unusual brain activity rather than throughout deep sleep. The reports remain interesting because they suggest that consciousness may not always follow the simple division between waking and unconsciousness. There may be degrees of awareness that ordinary language does not describe well. A person can be responsive without being fully conscious, conscious without forming lasting memories, or aware of very little while remaining internally alert. Medical conditions show how complicated these distinctions can become. A person in a state of reduced consciousness may show signs of brain activity without being able to communicate. Someone under anesthesia may later remember nothing, even if brief responses occurred during the procedure. People with certain sleep disorders may move, speak, or perform simple actions while having little or no awareness of what they are doing. Behavior alone does not always reveal experience, and memory alone does not settle the question. Consciousness must be inferred from several forms of evidence, including brain activity, responsiveness, and later reports. Even then, uncertainty can remain. Deep sleep is also important because it temporarily removes many forms of suffering. Worries that dominated the day do not continue in their usual form. The sleeper does not rehearse an argument, fear an upcoming event, or regret something from the past. The external problems may remain unchanged, but the mental activity that represents them has stopped. This shows that much of human suffering depends on the mind repeatedly constructing a personal story. An event occurs, memory preserves it, thought interprets it, emotion reacts to it, and the self claims it as part of its own situation. During deep sleep, this entire process is interrupted. Without the personal narrator, there is no one present to complain about the story. This does not mean that sleep solves problems. The unpaid bill remains unpaid, the difficult conversation may still be waiting, and the alarm will eventually make its contribution. Deep sleep provides relief because awareness of the problem is absent, not because the situation has been understood or resolved. Spiritual traditions sometimes compare the peace of deep sleep with the peace of deeper states of consciousness. The comparison is useful, but the difference is important. Deep sleep is peaceful because there is little or no conscious experience. A person does not know that the mind is quiet while it is quiet. The deeper waking states described by contemplative traditions are said to combine silence with clarity. Thought becomes less active, but awareness remains present. If that is possible, then the calm of deep sleep may offer an incomplete example of what awareness is like when the personal self is absent. The sleeper reaches this condition naturally but unconsciously. Meditation is said to approach a similar reduction of mental activity without losing alertness. The distinction can be expressed simply. In deep sleep, the mind is quiet and the person does not know it. In conscious stillness, the mind may be quiet and awareness knows the quiet directly. The first occurs every night. The second may require years of practice, which seems slightly unfair considering how easily most people can become unconscious on a comfortable sofa. The absence of self in deep sleep also challenges our usual ideas about what we are. If you were only your thoughts, you would cease to exist whenever thought stopped. If you were only your memories, you would disappear whenever memory became inactive. If you were only the conscious image of the body, you would vanish when the body was no longer experienced. Yet after deep sleep, you return and say that you slept. The continuity of the organism and the stored structure of the brain allow identity to resume. This suggests that the waking self is one mode of organization within a larger living system. It is real while active, but it is not active all the time. The body does not require a conscious owner during deep sleep. It regulates itself through processes that developed long before human beings began discussing identity. Breathing changes automatically in response to the needs of the blood. The heart adjusts its rate. The brain monitors temperature and internal chemistry. Protective responses remain active enough that an unusual sound, a strong smell, or a crying child may wake the sleeper. The brain does not close itself completely to the environment. It filters information according to importance. A person may sleep through steady traffic but wake when their name is spoken. A parent may ignore a loud appliance yet respond quickly to a small sound from a child. The sleeping brain continues evaluating signals even when the conscious self is absent. This hidden monitoring shows that information can be processed without entering awareness. The nervous system can detect patterns, compare them with stored significance, and trigger response without producing a conscious experience of the steps involved. Much of waking life works this way as well. The brain prepares movements, interprets language, recognizes faces, and predicts events before conscious awareness catches up. The self often receives the result and assumes it directed the entire process. A decision may seem to appear fully formed. A name comes to mind without a visible search. The body moves away from danger before a detailed thought occurs. Consciousness is involved, but it may not be the central controller it imagines itself to be. Deep sleep makes this particularly clear because the system continues when the controller is missing. The organism does not wait for the conscious mind to approve every breath or heartbeat. Life proceeds through layers of regulation that operate beneath awareness. When morning arrives, these layers help rebuild the waking state. Sensory information becomes stronger. Communication across the brain increases. The body is once again represented in detail. Memory connects the current moment with the past. The sense of being located behind the eyes or inside the body returns. The personal narrative begins almost immediately. You may remember what day it is, what needs to be done, and why getting out of bed seems less attractive than it did when you made plans the night before. Within seconds, the self has resumed its position at the center of experience. The transition from deep sleep to waking often passes through another state, one in which consciousness returns before reliable contact with the external world. Brain activity becomes more complex, but the senses remain mostly disconnected from the room. Memory, emotion, and imagination begin creating their own environment. A place appears without being built. People arrive without entering through a door. Time may jump forward, reverse, or lose its usual order. The dreamer accepts impossible events with very little resistance because the part of the mind that checks reality is working differently. The self that vanished in deep sleep begins to return, but it may return in an altered form. It may have another role, another history or abilities that would seem absurd after waking. It enters a world produced from within and treats that world as though it had always been there, which leads to the next question in our investigation. If the mind can create an entire reality during sleep, how much of the waking world is also being constructed by the same system? The return of consciousness during sleep does not immediately bring you back to the bedroom. Instead, the brain may create another place entirely and place you inside it without explanation. You might find yourself walking through a school you left years ago, speaking with someone who has been dead for a decade, or trying to catch a train that seems to depart from the upper floor of a supermarket. None of this usually feels unusual while it is happening. The dream supplies a setting, a body, a purpose, and enough background information to make the situation seem acceptable. You rarely stop to ask how you arrived there, or why the laws of space have become flexible. The mind creates the world, and also creates a version of you who believes in it. Dreams occur throughout sleep. but the most vivid and detailed dreams are strongly associated with rapid eye movement sleep. During this state, the eyes move beneath the eyelids, brain activity becomes more similar to waking activity, and the body enters a form of temporary muscle paralysis. This paralysis prevents most dream movements from being acted out physically. The brain may be running from danger, climbing stairs, or attempting to explain a complicated situation to a talking dog, while the body remains safely in bed. Without this protection, bedrooms would require considerably more padding. Rapid eye movement sleep does not remain constant through the night. It appears in cycles, becoming longer toward morning. Early in the night, deep sleep is more common. Later, vivid dreaming occupies a greater proportion of each cycle. This is one reason people often remember dreams when they wake naturally in the morning. The final dream may have been occurring only moments before waking, while dreams from earlier in the night have already been lost. The brain during dreaming is active, but the pattern of activity differs from ordinary waking awareness. Areas involved in vision, emotion, memory, and movement can become highly active. Regions involved in careful reasoning, self-monitoring, and testing whether events make sense may be less active. This combination helps explain the strange character of dreams. Images are strong, emotions can be intense, and events may feel urgent, while logical contradictions pass without much resistance. You may accept that your childhood home is also your current workplace. A person may change identity during conversation, and the dream continues as though nothing happened. You can travel from one city to another by opening a cupboard, yet the transition feels normal. The brain is producing experience without applying its usual standards of consistency. This does not mean that dreams have no structure. Many dreams follow emotional rather than logical rules. A concern from waking life may appear in a completely different form. Anxiety about a deadline may become a dream about missing a flight. A difficult conversation may return as an argument with someone unrelated to the original event. A feeling of being unprepared may produce the familiar dream of arriving at an examination without knowing the subject. The details may be invented, but the emotional pattern is recognizable. The dreaming brain appears to combine fragments of memory, current concerns, recent experiences, and older material into new scenes. It does not replay the past like a recording. It rebuilds pieces of the past into a temporary world. Memory is central to this process. During sleep, the brain continues working with information gathered while awake. Some memories are strengthened, others are reorganized, and many are connected with older knowledge. Dreaming may be partly related to this process, although scientists do not agree on a single purpose for dreams. They may help with emotional regulation, memory integration, threat simulation, creative problem solving, or several functions at once. The brain does not need dreams in order to process every memory, and not every dream contains a hidden message. Sometimes a strange dream may result from ordinary fragments being combined without much importance. A face seen briefly during the day, a sound from outside the room, and a concern about tomorrow can become a story involving a neighbour, an airport, and a missing shoe. The mind is excellent at producing meaning, even when the original material was not especially meaningful. This tendency becomes obvious after waking. People often try to interpret dreams as though every object has a fixed symbolic value. A door must mean opportunity, water must mean emotion, and a forgotten suitcase must mean that the mind has concerns about luggage. Symbols can be personally meaningful, but there is little evidence that all dreams use a universal code. The same image can mean different things to different people, depending on memory, culture, and experience. A dog in one person's dream may represent safety because of a beloved childhood pet. For someone else, it may represent fear because of a past attack. The image alone does not reveal its meaning. The emotional and personal context matters more than a standard list. What dreams clearly demonstrate is the brain's ability to produce a convincing world without ordinary sensory input. During waking life, the eyes receive light, the ears receive vibration, and the body sends information about position and movement. In a dream, much of this external input is reduced or ignored. The brain generates sights, sounds, people, spaces, and events largely from its own activity. The dreamer sees without light entering the eyes in the usual way. The dreamer hears voices without sound waves coming from a speaker. A dream body moves through a dream environment even though the physical body is mostly still. The experience is internally generated, yet it can feel completely real. This is possible because perception during waking life is also an active construction. The brain never receives the world in finished form. It receives signals and uses them to build a model. The eyes do not deliver colour, objects, distance, and meaning as a complete picture. They deliver changing patterns of light. The brain identifies edges, shapes, movement, depth, and familiar forms. It predicts what is likely to be present and compares those predictions with new information. Hearing works in a similar way. The ears detect changes in air pressure, but the brain turns those changes into words, music, footsteps, and voices. If a sentence is partly covered by noise, the brain may fill in the missing sound based on context. You experience the complete word even though some of the acoustic information never arrived. Waking perception is therefore not a passive recording. It is a controlled interpretation. The environment provides strong limits, and errors can be corrected by additional evidence. You can look again, move closer, touch an object, or ask another person what they see. In a dream, those external limits are greatly reduced. The brain's predictions are free to become the entire experience. This helps explain why impossible scenes seem stable while the dream continues. In waking life, a prediction that conflicts with sensory evidence is usually corrected. If you expect a door but find a wall, the wall forces the model to change. In a dream, the model produces both the expectation and the evidence. If the mind decides that a door leads to the ocean, then the ocean appears. There is no independent environment objecting to the arrangement. Dreams therefore offer a useful example of what some neuroscientists call controlled hallucination. The phrase does not mean that ordinary life is a medical hallucination. It means that perception is generated by the brain and controlled by signals from the world. During dreaming, the control becomes weaker, while the generative process continues. The difference between waking and dreaming is not that one is constructed and the other is not. Both are constructed. The difference is that waking experience is constrained by shared, stable, external information, while a dream is largely constrained by the brain's current activity, memories, and emotions. This creates an uncomfortable question. If the brain can make a dream feel real, how do you know that you are awake now? Philosophers have asked versions of this question for centuries. A dream can contain the memory of a past that never occurred, the expectation of a future that will never arrive, and the certainty that the present situation is real. The dreamer may remember having lived in the dream city for years even though the city was created seconds earlier. When waking occurs, the dream loses its authority. The bedroom returns, the physical body is recognized, and the dream is reclassified as an internal event. You know you are awake because waking experience is more stable, continuous, and shared. Objects remain where they were. Other people confirm the same general environment. Actions have reliable consequences. A cup placed on a table tends to remain there rather than becoming a bird when attention moves elsewhere. This practical difference is enough for everyday life, even if it does not provide absolute philosophical certainty. You may not be able to prove that waking reality is the final level of existence, but it follows consistent rules. Those rules allow prediction, cooperation, and science. A dream may feel real, but it usually cannot support a reliable experiment. Measuring the same object twice may produce different results, assuming the measuring tape has not become a snake. The dream self is another important part of the puzzle. During deep sleep, the ordinary self was largely absent. In dreaming, a self returns, but it may not be the same self you recognize while awake. The dream version of you may accept a different age, occupation, relationship, or history. It may possess abilities you do not have, forget facts you know well, or respond to events in ways that surprise you after waking. Even when the dream self resembles the waking person, it is often less stable. It has enough identity to move through the story, but it may not have access to the full autobiographical memory that supports waking identity. You may encounter a dead relative without remembering that they died. You may return to school without remembering that you finished years ago. The dream self knows only what the dream currently requires. This suggests that the sense of self is assembled from available information. During waking life, the brain has access to the body, the external environment, and a broad range of memories. During dreaming, those sources are altered. The resulting self is constructed from a smaller and less reliable set of materials. The dreamer usually experiences the world from a first-person position. There is a body, or at least a location, from which events are perceived. Yet dreams can also shift perspective. You may see yourself from outside, become another person, or observe a scene without a clear body. The point of view changes because it is not anchored by normal sensory input from the physical body. This flexibility shows that the feeling of being located behind the eyes is not as permanent as it seems. It is a model created by the brain to organize perception and action. In waking life, signals from vision, touch, balance, muscles, and internal organs keep this model stable. During dreams, the brain can relocate the center of experience without needing to move the physical body at all. Experiments with virtual reality and body illusions support this idea. When visual and tactile information are carefully coordinated, people can feel that a false hand belongs to them or that their point of view has shifted outside the body. The brain uses sensory agreement to decide what counts as self. Change the agreement, and the boundary of the body can change. Dreaming performs a similar operation internally. It creates a body that feels owned, places it inside a world, and generates events that appear to happen to that person. The dream self is convincing because the brain uses many of the same systems that support identity while awake. Emotion is often stronger than reasoning in dreams. Fear can become intense even when the threat makes a little sense. A small problem may feel catastrophic. Relief, love, shame, or grief may arrive with unusual force. This may reflect increased activity in emotional brain systems and reduced control from regions involved in regulation and critical judgment. Nightmares show this clearly. The dream creates danger, the body responds with increased heart rate and stress, and the dreamer experiences fear as though the threat were real. Waking ends the danger instantly, but the physical response may continue. The room is safe, yet the body needs time to accept the new information. Nightmares may be influenced by stress, trauma, illness, medication, disrupted sleep, or ordinary emotional processing. Repeated nightmares can become a serious problem and are not simply interesting examples of imagination. They can affect mood, concentration, and the willingness to sleep. In such cases, treatment may involve changing sleep habits, addressing anxiety or trauma, and practicing new versions of the dream while awake. The fact that rehearsing a different ending can reduce some nightmares shows that dreams are connected with learned expectations. The brain can become familiar with a new outcome and later bring that pattern into sleep. Dreaming is not completely beyond influence, even though direct control is limited. Lucid dreaming provides an even clearer example. A lucid dream occurs when the dreamer becomes aware that they are dreaming while the dream continues. The world remains present, but its status changes. The person recognizes that the scene is being generated by the mind. This recognition can produce excitement, which often wakes the dreamer immediately. Remaining calm may allow the dream to continue. Some lucid dreamers learn to influence events, change locations, ask dream characters questions, or attempt activities that are unavailable in waking life. Flying is popular, perhaps because few people become lucid and decide that the best use of the opportunity is completing paperwork. Lucid dreaming is scientifically important because it combines features of dreaming and waking self-awareness. The person remains asleep, but parts of the reflective mind become active. In laboratory studies, trained lucid dreamers have used planned eye movements to signal that they know they are dreaming. Since the eyes can move during rapid eye movement sleep, these signals can be detected from outside. Researchers have even communicated simple questions to some lucid dreamers and received responses through eye movements or facial muscle signals. These experiments show that a sleeping person can sometimes process information from the environment while remaining inside a dream. The boundary between sleeping and waking consciousness is less complete than it appears. Lucid dreams also provide a direct lesson about identification. Before lucidity, the dreamer is absorbed in the dream. The events are taken as reality. After lucidity appears, the same events may continue, but the person no longer relates to them in the same way. A threatening figure may become less frightening because the dreamer knows it is part of the dream. The content has not necessarily changed. The relationship to the content has changed. This pattern resembles what meditation practices attempt during waking life. Thoughts and emotions continue to arise, but they are recognized as events in the mind rather than unquestioned facts. The practitioner does not need to remove every thought. They learn to see thought as thought. A person lost in anxiety may treat every prediction as reality. A person observing anxiety may still feel discomfort, but recognize that the mind is generating possibilities, not reporting certain facts. The difference is similar to becoming lucid inside a dream. The world of experience continues, but identification becomes less complete. This comparison should not be taken too far. Waking problems have real consequences, and recognizing thought as thought does not make practical responsibilities disappear. The point is that consciousness can change its relationship to its own constructions. Dreams also reveal how quickly the mind can create explanations. If something changes suddenly, the dream often supplies a reason after the event. You may find yourself in another country and immediately feel that you have been travelling there for days. A stranger appears, and the dream provides a history of knowing them. The explanation feels like memory, even though it was created at the same time as the situation. The waking mind performs a milder version of this process. People often act first and explain later. The brain makes decisions through processes that are not fully conscious, and the conscious mind constructs a reasonable account afterward. The explanation may be accurate, but it may also be incomplete. Studies of divided brain function have shown how strongly the mind prefers a coherent story. When one part of the brain receives information that another part cannot access, the speaking mind may invent an explanation for behavior without knowing the true cause. It does not usually admit that it lacks the information. It produces the best story available. Dreaming shows this storytelling system operating with fewer restrictions. Events occur, and the dream self accepts whatever explanation allows the story to continue. Continuity matters more than accuracy. This habit may be one reason the self feels so stable during waking life. The brain constantly edits experience into a narrative. Gaps are filled, contradictions are reduced, and actions are linked with reasons. The result is a personal story that feels continuous, even though the underlying mental processes are distributed and often unconscious. Memory after dreaming is equally unstable. A vivid dream may seem unforgettable at the moment of waking, then disappear within minutes. The brain has not stored it in the same way as a waking event. Attention moves to the room, the day, and the demands of ordinary life, while the dream loses detail. Writing a dream down immediately can preserve more of it. This is not because the dream becomes more important when recorded. The act of recalling and describing strengthens the memory. Without that effort, much of the content fades. The speed of this forgetting creates another lesson about identity. While dreaming, the dream may contain a complete world and a strong emotional reality. After waking, it becomes a fragment. A state that dominated consciousness can vanish almost entirely because the brain no longer supports it. Waking concerns may feel permanent in a similar way. An emotion fills awareness and appears to define reality, but later it weakens. The mind moves into another state, and the previous certainty becomes difficult to recover. Consciousness does not simply contain experience. It continually changes the importance and meaning of what it contains. Spiritual traditions have often used the dream as a comparison for waking life. They do not always claim that the physical world is literally unreal. The comparison usually points to identification. In a dream, the mind mistakes its own construction for an independent world. In waking life, people may mistake thoughts, roles, and personal stories for the full extent of who they are. You may describe yourself through occupation, nationality, relationships, memories, and personality. These are real parts of life, but they are also changing structures. Occupations end, relationships change, memories are revised, personality develops over time. The waking self may be more stable than the dream self, but it is not fixed. The dream makes this easier to see because its construction is obvious after waking. During the dream, the world and the self appear together. When the dream ends, both disappear. The awareness that knows the waking state then looks back and says that the experience was created by the mind. The next question is whether ordinary waking awareness can examine itself with the same clarity. While awake, the brain receives stable sensory information, maintains a detailed body model, and connects the present with a long personal history. These features make the waking world more reliable, but they also make the waking self more convincing. As morning arrives and the dream begins to break apart, external signals regain strength. Light reaches the eyes through closed lids. Sounds from the room become organized. The weight and position of the physical body return. The dream world may briefly mix with the bedroom, producing confusion about where one ends and the other begins. Then the waking model takes control. The room becomes stable, memory returns, and the familiar identity is restored. You know your name, your location, and the general sequence of events that brought you here. The strange confidence of the dream is replaced by the equally strong confidence of waking life. This state feels complete because it is shared, consistent, and supported by the senses. Yet it is still a model built by the brain, and at its center sits the most persistent construction of all, the person who says that this body, this history, and this stream of thought belong to me. When the dream releases its hold and the room returns, waking awareness seems to arrive as a complete package. The body is here, the world is outside it, and a familiar person appears to be looking through the eyes. Within moments, you know where you are, what day it is, and which concerns have followed you from yesterday. The dream may still be fading, but the waking self has already resumed its usual work. It connects the present moment with memory, places the body inside a stable environment, and begins a quiet stream of commentary about what is happening. This stream may mention the weather, the need to get up, the unfinished task waiting later, or the strong argument for remaining under the blanket for another 10 minutes. The details vary, but the basic structure is remarkably consistent. There is a world being experienced, and there is someone at the center of that world who says that the experience belongs to me. This sense of being someone feels immediate, but it is built from several processes working together. The brain receives information from the eyes, ears, skin, muscles, joints, and internal organs. It combines these signals with memory and expectation to create a model of a body located in a particular place. You know where your hands are even when you're not looking at them. You can walk through a doorway without calculating the width of your shoulders. You recognize hunger, tiredness, tension, and changes in breathing as conditions happening inside your body. These abilities are so automatic that they seem simple, but they require constant coordination across the nervous system. The self begins with this living map. Before it becomes a name, a profession, or a personal history, it is a body that must be kept safe, fed, rested, and prevented from walking into furniture. The brain's model of the body is dependable, but it can be changed. In a well-known experiment, a person places one hand out of sight while looking at a realistic rubber hand. An experimenter touches the hidden real hand and the visible rubber hand at the same time. After a while, many people begin to feel that the rubber hand belongs to them. If the false hand is suddenly threatened, the body may produce a fear response, even though the person knows intellectually that the hand is made of rubber. The illusion works because the brain is comparing sight and touch. When the signals match closely enough, it updates its model of what belongs to the body. Ownership is not determined by a permanent inner observer. It is inferred from the information available. Virtual reality can create similar effects. A person may look down and see a digital body where the physical body should be. When the movements of the digital body match their own movements, the new form can begin to feel partly like self. Researchers can alter the apparent size, age, location, or appearance of the body and observe changes in perception and behavior. These experiences do not mean that the body is imaginary. They show that the conscious experience of the body is a model constructed from sensory agreement. Most of the time, that model matches the physical organism extremely well. When the signals are carefully rearranged, the boundary of the self can shift. The body also sends continuous information from within. The brain monitors the heartbeat, breathing, digestion, temperature, and chemical condition of the organs. This internal sense is called interoception, and it contributes strongly to emotion and identity. A racing heart may be experienced as fear, excitement, or physical effort depending on the situation. Tightness in the stomach may become anxiety when combined with a worrying thought. A slow breath and relaxed muscles may support a feeling of safety. The conscious self is therefore not only a story told in words, it is also a changing interpretation of the body's condition. This is one reason hunger, exhaustion, pain, and illness can alter personality for a while. The person who seemed calm after breakfast may become a different philosopher when lunch is delayed. Memory adds another layer. Waking awareness does not begin from nothing each morning. It connects the present body with a collection of remembered events. You recognize your home because the brain compares current information with stored patterns. You know your relationships because memories provide a history. You understand your goals because previous decisions remain available. Without memory, each moment would be isolated. The self would have no clear past and little basis for imagining a future. Memory, however, is not a perfect recording. Each act of remembering is a reconstruction. The brain stores parts of an event, including sights, emotions, meanings, and general structure. When the memory returns, these parts are assembled again. The result may feel complete even when details have changed. New information can become mixed with old information, and repeated retelling can strengthen parts of the story that were not present in the original event. The personal past is therefore stable enough to support identity, but flexible enough to be edited without permission. This creates a surprising fact about the story of I. The person you believe yourself to be depends partly on memories that are incomplete and constantly updated. You may describe yourself as confident because several moments of confidence are easy to remember, while forgotten moments tell a different story. You may believe you have always disliked something when the preference actually developed recently. Families can remember the same event in incompatible ways, with each person completely certain that everyone else has become confused. The self is not built from a perfect archive, it is built from a useful selection. Language strengthens this selection by turning experience into a narrative. Events happen, and the mind gives them names. A difficult conversation becomes a failure, a lesson, an insult, or a misunderstanding depending on the interpretation. A physical sensation becomes a sign of danger or an ordinary response to stress. A period of uncertainty becomes proof that life is going badly, or evidence that change is occurring. The words used to describe an experience influence how it is remembered and how future events are understood. The personal pronoun I sits at the center of this narrative. I decided, I succeeded, I was rejected, I need to improve, I should have known. The word is useful because it connects actions and responsibilities to one person. Society could not function well if everyone treated identity as a minor suggestion whenever a bill arrived. Yet the repeated use of I also creates the impression of a single controller standing behind every thought and action. When the mind is examined closely, that controller becomes difficult to locate. Thoughts often appear without being chosen. A memory enters awareness because a smell, sound, or word triggered it. An emotion begins before the person can explain its cause. An idea forms after a period of unconscious processing and arrives as though it has been delivered. You may decide to stop thinking about a song and discover that the effort has made it considerably louder. Conscious control exists, but it works alongside many processes that begin outside awareness. Even deliberate decisions depend on activity that is not fully conscious. The brain evaluates past experience, current needs, possible outcomes, emotional responses, and social expectations. Much of this work happens before a clear choice enters awareness. The conscious mind receives the result and may then explain why it was chosen. The explanation can be accurate, but it is often simpler than the process that produced the decision. This does not mean that choice is meaningless or that people are not responsible for their actions. Conscious reflection can interrupt habits, compare alternatives, and change future behavior. Training and attention can reshape the patterns from which decisions emerge. The point is that the self is not a separate commander issuing orders to the brain. It is part of the brain's activity, including the ability to observe, plan, restrain impulses, and learn from consequences. Certain neurological cases reveal how strongly the mind prefers the idea of a unified controller. In people whose major connections between the two halves of the brain have been surgically divided, information presented to one side may guide behavior without being available to the language systems on the other side. When asked to explain an action, the speaking part of the brain may create a reasonable answer even though it does not know the true cause. It does not usually announce that the information is missing. It produces a story that fits what it can observe. This tendency is not limited to unusual medical cases. Every mind explains itself using incomplete information. A person may feel irritated and blame the nearest inconvenience, even though lack of sleep is the stronger cause. Someone may reject an idea because of an emotional reaction, and later create a logical argument to justify the rejection. The story may sound convincing because the brain is designed to maintain coherence. A stable self requires events to appear connected, and when a connection is missing, the mind often supplies one. Waking awareness is therefore both a window and an editor. It receives information about the world, but it also selects, interprets, and arranges that information. Attention determines which details become central and which remain unnoticed. Two people can stand in the same room and remember different events because their attention was directed by different concerns. One notices facial expressions, another notices technical details, and a third notices that the chairs are uncomfortable. Each experiences a slightly different version of the same situation. The brain also relies heavily on prediction. It uses past experience to guess what is likely to happen next, and then compares those guesses with incoming information. This allows perception to operate quickly. You can recognize a familiar face in poor light because the brain fills missing details. You can understand speech in a noisy room because context narrows the possible words. You can reach for a cup without carefully examining its shape each time. Prediction is efficient, but it can also preserve mistakes. If the mind strongly expects rejection, an uncertain expression may be interpreted as disapproval. If someone believes a place is dangerous, ordinary sounds may become signs of threat. Expectations guide attention, and attention collects evidence that appears to confirm the expectation. The resulting experience feels direct even though it has been shaped by the brain's prior model. The self is one of these models. It predicts how you're likely to think, feel, and behave. A person who repeatedly says that they are bad with names may stop making the effort required to remember them. Someone who believes they cannot speak in public may interpret normal nervousness as proof of inability. The story of I becomes a set of instructions that influences future experience. These stories are not always harmful. A stable identity can support discipline, courage, loyalty, and long-term purpose. A person who sees themselves as dependable may act consistently with that value. Someone who identifies as a learner may remain open to correction. The problem begins when a useful story is mistaken for an unchangeable fact. Personality changes across situations and over time. A quiet person may become animated with close friends. A confident professional may feel uncertain in an unfamiliar setting. Someone who behaved selfishly in the past may learn generosity. The brain is shaped by habit, but it is also capable of new learning. The self is more flexible than its own description suggests. Social life adds further layers. You experience yourself partly through the responses of other people. Names, roles, status, culture, and relationships become part of identity. You may be a parent in one setting, an employee in another, a friend in another, and a stranger on a crowded street. Each role activates different memories, expectations, and behaviors. None is necessarily false, but none is the complete person. Problems arise when one role becomes the entire identity. Losing a job can then feel like losing the self. The end of a relationship can seem to remove the person one believed oneself to be. Aging can threaten identities built around appearance, ability, or social position. These experiences are painful because the brain has connected a temporary structure with the feeling of existence itself. Contemplative traditions examine this attachment by asking whether anything in experience remains unchanged. The body changes from infancy to old age. Thoughts change throughout the day. Emotions rise and fall. Beliefs can be revised. Memories fade or take new forms. Roles begin and end. If all of these are changing, can any one of them be the permanent self? A common response is that the self must be the observer of change. The body changes, but something knows the body. Thoughts change, but something notices thought. The observer appears more stable than the objects being observed. This is the quiet witness introduced earlier. Care is needed here because the observer can easily become another mental image. A person may imagine a calm figure inside who watches everything from a safe distance. That figure would still be part of experience, another thought or image appearing in awareness. The witness is not meant to be a hidden object. It refers to the simple fact that experience is known. Try to notice the next thought that appears. It may be about the meaning of these words, something that happened earlier, or a task waiting later. The thought has a beginning. It remains briefly, then changes or gives way to another. You did not need to create a separate observer to notice it. Awareness was already present when the thought arrived. The same is true of emotion. If irritation is present, there is also knowledge of irritation. If calm is present, calm is known. Awareness does not need to share the quality of what it observes. A worried thought can appear in awareness without making awareness itself worried. A painful sensation can be known without the knowing having a physical location. This distinction can create practical freedom. When thought and identity are completely mixed, every mental event feels personal and authoritative. A critical thought appears, and the person believes it. Fear predicts disaster, and the prediction is treated as evidence. Anger creates judgment, and the judgment seems unquestionably correct. When awareness recognizes thought as an event, another response becomes possible. The thought can be examined rather than obeyed. The emotion can be felt without immediately becoming action. A familiar personal story can be noticed as a pattern shaped by memory and habit. Nothing needs to be denied. The experience is simply seen more clearly. Meditation trains this recognition by reducing the amount of automatic involvement. A person may place attention on breathing, bodily sensation, or sound. Thoughts continue to appear, but each time attention wanders, the person notices and returns. The purpose is not to win a battle against thought. Trying to force the mind into silence usually produces frustration and a larger supply of thoughts about why the mind is not silent. The practice reveals that attention can move without every thought being followed. A memory can arise and pass. A plan can appear without being completed at that moment. A worry can be recognized as a prediction rather than an event already taking place. With practice, the gap between awareness and mental content may become easier to notice. Brain imaging studies of meditation suggest changes in networks involved in attention, body awareness, emotion, and self-related thinking. One network often discussed is active when the mind is engaged in personal memories, future planning, and thoughts about the self. Meditation can alter activity and communication within this network, especially in experienced practitioners. These findings do not prove spiritual claims, but they show that the habitual construction of the self can be changed through training. The effects vary. Some people experience greater calm and concentration. Others become more aware of discomfort they had previously avoided. Meditation is not a guaranteed route to pleasant feelings, and it should not be used as a replacement for medical or psychological care when those are needed. Its importance for this investigation is that it provides a way to observe the story of I while it is being created. During ordinary waking awareness, the story is rarely questioned. The self feels like the owner of the body, the author of thought, and the center of perception. The world appears to be divided into what belongs to me and what does not. This division is useful, but it can become rigid. Every event is measured according to personal gain, loss, approval, or threat. As awareness becomes less attached to the narrative, the division may soften. Sounds can be heard without immediately naming their source. Sensations can be felt without turning them into a story. Thought can become quieter because it is no longer being encouraged by constant reaction. The person remains awake and responsive, but the usual commentary moves into the background. This is different from deep sleep, where the mental world disappears along with ordinary awareness. It is also different from dreaming, where the mind is absorbed in its own creation. Here the body remains awake, the environment remains present, and awareness may become clearer as the personal narrator becomes less active. At first, such moments may last only briefly. Attention rests on breathing, and for a second there is no need to describe anything. A sound is heard without an immediate judgment. The body is present without a strong sense of ownership. Then thought returns and announces that something unusual just happened, usually bringing the quiet moment to a prompt and efficient end. With continued practice, traditions claim that awareness can remain present without depending on a stream of thought. The self does not need to be destroyed, and practical identity does not vanish. A person can still use a name, remember appointments, and avoid taking someone else's coat. The change concerns what is treated as fundamental. Instead of awareness belonging to the personal story is experienced as something appearing within awareness. The usual order is reversed. Thoughts, memories, sensations, and the sense of I become content rather than the container. This possibility takes us beyond ordinary waking consciousness. The next state is described not as sleep, imagination, or loss of awareness, but as awareness remaining fully present when the familiar movement of thought becomes still. When the usual stream of thought begins to quiet, the first thing many people notice is not peace, but how much noise had been present all along. Plans repeat themselves, old conversations return, small discomforts demand attention, and the mind produces a steady commentary on everything from the meaning of life to whether the room is slightly too warm. Most of this activity feels normal because it has accompanied waking awareness for as long as memory reaches. It is easy to assume that being conscious means thinking, and that if thought stopped, consciousness would stop with it. The state known as transcendental consciousness challenges that assumption. It is described as a condition in which awareness remains clear, while ordinary thought becomes very quiet or temporarily absent. The body is not asleep, the person has not lost consciousness, and the senses have not necessarily stopped functioning. What changes is the mind's usual habit of turning every sensation, memory, and perception into a personal story. The word transcendental can make the idea sound more dramatic than it needs to be. In this context, it does not require floating above the floor, receiving secret information, or developing an unexpected ability to understand the opinions of household plants. It refers to going beyond the ordinary activity of thought while remaining aware. Thoughts may still occur at the edges of experience, but they no longer occupy the centre. Attention is not following one idea into another, and the familiar narrator is not constantly explaining what is happening. There may be awareness of breathing, a faint sound, or the body resting in place, but these experiences are not immediately organised into a strong sense of, I am here, I am doing this, and this is what it means. Most people have brief moments that resemble this condition, although they may not recognise them. A person can become still while watching a wide landscape, listening closely to music, or sitting quietly after an intense emotion has passed. For a few seconds, thought may stop without any effort. The experience is simple, and the mind often notices it only after it has ended. A thought then appears saying that everything was quiet, which is slightly inconvenient because the thought arrives just in time to disturb the quiet it is describing. These natural pauses are not necessarily the full state claimed by contemplative traditions, but they show that awareness does not always require continuous verbal thinking. Meditation attempts to make this distinction easier to observe. A person may begin by placing attention on the breath, a repeated sound, a bodily sensation, or another simple object. The mind wanders, often within seconds. It remembers something, plans something, evaluates the practice, or becomes concerned that other people are probably meditating more successfully. The person notices the distraction and returns attention to the chosen object. This process may happen many times. The apparent failure is actually the practice, because each moment of noticing reveals that thought can be observed rather than automatically followed. With time, the movement of attention may become less restless. Thoughts continue to arise, but they lose some of their ability to pull the mind into long sequences. A memory appears and fades. A plan forms without developing into a full rehearsal. A sensation is noticed without becoming a problem that requires immediate commentary. The mind is not forced into silence. It settles because less energy is being given to each passing event. This difference matters. Trying to stop thought through force usually creates another layer of thought. The person thinks about not thinking, checks whether thinking has stopped, becomes frustrated that thought remains, and then develops several new thoughts about frustration. A quieter state is more likely when mental events are allowed to appear without being resisted or continued. The person does not need to approve of every thought, but neither do they need to fight it. The thought is recognized and attention is allowed to rest again. The condition described as transcendental consciousness is said to occur when attention moves beyond even the object of meditation. The breath, sound, or sensation that supported the practice becomes less distinct. There is no need to hold attention on anything in particular. Awareness remains, but it is not occupied by a clear object. The person is not asleep because there is alertness. They are not dreaming because there is no internally created scene. They are not engaged in ordinary waking thought because the usual narrative has become quiet. What remains is described as simple awareness, awareness that is present without needing to be awareness of a specific thing. This claim is difficult to discuss because language usually describes relationships between subjects and objects. Someone hears a sound, sees an image, remembers an event, or feels a sensation. When a person reports awareness without a particular object, ordinary grammar begins to become less useful. They may describe silence, emptiness, stillness, or pure consciousness, but each of these words can be misunderstood. Silence may suggest the absence of external sound. Emptiness may suggest dullness or unconsciousness. Stillness may suggest that nothing is happening in the body. The intended meaning is more specific. Mental content is reduced, but the capacity to know experience remains. A person emerging from such a state may report that they were awake but not thinking. Time may have passed without being measured closely. The body may have felt distant or less sharply defined. There may have been no strong sense of personal identity, yet there was no confusion about being alive. The experience may feel calm because the systems that normally produce worry, comparison, and personal judgment were not dominating attention. These reports vary greatly. Some people describe a clear break in thought. Others describe a gradual reduction in mental activity. Some experience a pleasant sense of ease, while others notice boredom, restlessness, or discomfort. The existence of a traditional name does not mean that every person reaches the same condition or interprets it in the same way. Expectations can influence reports, and people may use the language they have learned from teachers, books, or communities. Careful investigation therefore requires both respect for first-person experience and caution about the conclusions drawn from it. From the perspective of neuroscience, meditation can alter several processes that support ordinary waking consciousness. Attention may become more stable. Activity related to planning, self-evaluation, and personal memory may decrease. Signals from the body may be noticed with greater clarity, while emotional reactions become less automatic. Networks that usually help maintain the personal story can change their pattern of activity and communication. One network often studied in this context is involved in thinking about the self, remembering personal events, imagining the future, and allowing the mind to wander. It becomes active when attention is not focused on a demanding external task, and the mind begins moving through its own concerns. This activity is not a problem by itself. It supports planning, learning, social understanding, and creativity. Difficulties arise when the network becomes trapped in repetitive worry, regret, or self-criticism. Experienced meditators sometimes show reduced activity in parts of this system during practice, along with stronger coordination between networks involved in attention and monitoring. This may help explain why thoughts can arise without taking complete control. The brain remains active, but the balance between mental processes changes. Researchers have also examined brain rhythms during meditation. Different practices are associated with different patterns, and there is no single electrical signature that proves transcendental consciousness has occurred. Some studies report increased synchronization in particular frequency ranges, changes in slow activity, or shifts in communication between the front and back of the brain. These results are interesting, but they must be interpreted carefully. Meditation traditions use different methods, participants have different levels of training, and the same word may refer to experiences that are not identical. A brain pattern can show that a state differs from ordinary rest, but it cannot decide what the state means. It may reveal reduced sensory processing, increased attention, altered self-representation, or changes in arousal. It cannot determine by itself whether a person has contacted a universal field of awareness, or simply entered an unusual but entirely brain-based condition. This is where scientific and spiritual interpretations begin to separate. A physicalist interpretation says that awareness without thought is produced by a particular organization of brain activity. When systems involved in language, memory, and self-related thinking become quiet, the brain continues to support a minimal form of conscious experience. The person experiences awareness without much content because the neural processes that generate content are less active. A spiritual interpretation may say that awareness is always present beneath mental activity and becomes obvious when thought settles. In this view, the brain and mind do not create awareness. They cover it with sensation, memory, and identity. Meditation does not manufacture a new state. It removes distractions and allows a more basic condition to be recognized. Both interpretations can agree about part of the experience. Thought becomes quieter, the personal narrative weakens, and awareness remains. They disagree about what awareness is and where it comes from. One treats it as a state generated by the nervous system. The other treats it as a fundamental reality that the nervous system usually limits or shapes. The experience alone may not settle the disagreement. A person can feel that awareness is independent of the body without proving that it is. Strong conviction is not the same as evidence. Dreams demonstrate how completely the mind can accept a constructed reality. Certain drugs, seizures, and neurological conditions can also produce a powerful sense of unity, timelessness, or separation from the body. The fact that an experience feels more real than ordinary life does not guarantee that the interpretation attached to it is correct. At the same time, reducing the experience to a brain scan does not fully explain it. Describing which networks became quieter does not capture what it was like to remain aware without a strong sense of self. The objective and subjective descriptions remain connected but different. A complete account would need to explain both the brain process and the experience it supports. The absence of ordinary thought also raises a question about knowledge. If no concepts are active and no words are being used, can anything be known? Contemplative traditions often answer that awareness can know itself directly, without forming a statement. This is compared with the way pain is known before it is described, or the way a colour is seen before its name is remembered. The experience does not need a sentence in order to be present. In ordinary life, knowledge is often associated with facts, definitions, and explanations. You know a route because you can describe it. You know a person because you remember details about them. Direct experience works differently. You can recognize the taste of a fruit without being able to explain its chemistry. You can feel tired without calculating the biological processes involved. Awareness without thought is claimed to be known in this immediate sense. There is no idea saying that awareness is present. Its presence is simply the condition of the moment. Critics may respond that a state without memory cannot later be reported, and a state with memory must have contained some mental processing. This is a reasonable problem. Reports are always made afterward, using language and memory. The person says that thought was absent, but some form of brain activity must have allowed the experience to be stored. It is possible that thought was greatly reduced rather than completely absent. It is also possible that subtle mental content was present but not recognized as ordinary thought. The boundary between no thought and very little thought is difficult to measure. A person may not experience verbal sentences, yet there may be sensations, expectations, or non-verbal forms of processing. The brain continues regulating posture, breathing, and attention. Complete mental inactivity would be unlikely in a living awake person. For this reason, awareness without thought should not be understood as a brain containing no activity. It refers to the absence of the usual conscious narrative. The mind is not discussing the past, predicting the future, or defending an identity. Processing continues, but it is not experienced as a stream of personal commentary. The sense of time may change under these conditions. Ordinary time is marked by events. A thought begins, another follows, and memory records the sequence. When thought becomes quiet and attention is not tracking change, several minutes may pass without feeling long or short. The person is not unconscious, but the mind has stopped dividing experience into a detailed before and after. This resembles deep sleep in one limited way. During deep sleep, psychological time disappears because awareness and memory are greatly reduced. In transcendental consciousness, time is said to become less noticeable, while alertness remains. The absence of thought removes many of the markers used to measure duration. The difference becomes clear when the person returns to ordinary activity. After deep sleep, waking may involve confusion and a gradual rebuilding of identity. After meditation, the person may open their eyes with full orientation, They know where they are, remember what they were doing, and can continue with the day. The self was quiet rather than destroyed. This temporary quiet can reveal how much effort the personal narrative normally requires. The self must continually connect current experience with memory, goals, relationships, and concerns. It evaluates what each event means and whether it threatens or supports the person. When this process slows, the body may feel less defended and the environment less divided into things that must be controlled, avoided, or acquired. The practical effects may include reduced stress, improved attention, and greater emotional flexibility. A person who has experienced thoughts as temporary events may be less likely to treat every worry as a fact. They may notice anger before acting on it, or recognize that a painful memory has returned without assuming that the past is happening again. These changes do not require belief in a spiritual theory. They can be understood as the result of attention training and a less rigid sense of self. However, meditation does not always produce calm. When external activity decreases, difficult memories, fear, or bodily discomfort may become more noticeable. Some people experience panic, detachment, or a disturbing loss of familiar identity. A practice that helps one person may be destabilizing for another, especially when there is a history of trauma or certain mental health conditions. Guidance from a qualified teacher or health professional may be important when unusual experiences become frightening or interfere with daily life. A genuine reduction in self-focused thought should not be confused with emotional numbness or dissociation. In dissociation, a person may feel unreal, detached, or disconnected in a way that reduces clarity and functioning. In the contemplative state being described, awareness is said to become clearer and more stable. The person remains capable of responding to the environment and later returns to ordinary activity without confusion. The difference can sometimes be seen in the results. A healthy practice tends to support patience, attention, and responsible behavior. A harmful condition may produce fear, avoidance, disorganization, or an inability to manage ordinary life. No experience should be considered advanced simply because it is unusual. The practical consequences matter. Another common misunderstanding is that awareness without thought requires permanent silence. Human beings need thought. Planning, language, memory, and judgment are essential. The goal is not to remove them, but to stop treating them as the whole of consciousness. Thought becomes a tool that can be used when needed rather than a process that must run without rest. A person who has touched a quiet state still needs to remember appointments, solve problems, and understand other people. They do not become more conscious by forgetting how to cross a road. The change is in identification. Thoughts are present, but they are no longer assumed to be a permanent self. This may influence the way decisions are made. When the mind is less crowded by immediate reaction, there is more room to notice competing motives. Fear can be present without controlling the choice. Desire can be felt without becoming an instruction. The person may respond from a wider understanding of the situation rather than from the first thought that appears. The sense of a quiet witness becomes clearer here. In ordinary waking awareness, the witness is mixed with thought. The mind says, I am thinking, I am feeling, I am choosing. In a quieter state, thought is seen as something occurring within awareness. The witness does not need to comment. Its presence is shown by the fact that experience is known. At first, this may feel like a separate observer watching the body and mind. There is awareness on one side and experience on the other. This separation can be useful because it weakens automatic identification. The person recognizes that they are not limited to each passing thought or emotion. Contemplative traditions do not always stop at this division. They claim that the witness itself can later be understood in a different way. As long as awareness feels like a private observer located inside one person, a boundary remains. There is an inner witness and an outer world. The state is quieter than ordinary waking consciousness, but the structure of separation continues. Transcendental consciousness is therefore described as an important change rather than the end of the progression. awareness has been recognized apart from thought, but it may still feel personal. The person may say that I am the awareness observing my mind. The word I remains, even though it now refers to something more basic than memory, personality, or the body. With repeated experience, the quiet awareness may begin to remain available during ordinary activity. It does not require the person to sit with closed eyes or withdraw from the senses. Thoughts return, conversations occur, and the body moves through daily tasks, but awareness is not completely lost inside them. A person may notice that silence remains in the background while speaking. Emotion may arise without covering the entire field of experience. The body may act, and thought may plan, while a stable sense of awareness continues beneath the movement. The quiet state that first appeared only during meditation begins to accompany waking life. Traditional accounts describe this development as the beginning of cosmic consciousness. The term does not initially mean that the person understands the entire universe or gains information about distant galaxies. It means that awareness is no longer experienced only as a temporary state reached when thought becomes quiet. It becomes a continuous background through waking, dreaming, and sleep. The personal self continues to function, but it is no longer treated as the deepest identity. There is the individual person with a name, body, memory, and role in the world, and there is also the awareness in which that person is experienced. At first, these may seem like two layers existing together. Daily life continues on the surface, while a stable witness remains present beneath it. This creates the next question. If awareness can remain while thoughts, emotions, and states of mind change, is that awareness truly limited to one body? Or does the feeling of private ownership belong to the same personal story that has already begun to loosen? The question of whether awareness is limited to one body becomes more difficult when the quiet witness is no longer experienced only during meditation. At first, a person may recognize awareness during a brief period of stillness, then lose that recognition as soon as ordinary activity begins. Thought returns, attention moves outward, and the familiar identity takes control again. With continued practice, some people report that the underlying awareness begins to remain present while the mind is active. They can speak, work, remember, plan, and respond to other people while also noticing that thoughts and actions are occurring within a larger field of experience. The personal self has not disappeared, but it no longer feels like the whole of what they are. This condition is traditionally called cosmic consciousness. The word cosmic can create the wrong impression. It may sound as though the person suddenly understands distant galaxies, receives messages from stars, or becomes unusually interested in purchasing a telescope. That is not the main meaning here. Cosmic consciousness refers to a change in identity. Awareness is no longer experienced as a temporary condition, produced only when the mind becomes quiet. It begins to feel continuous, while the body, personality, and thoughts are experienced as changing contents within it. The individual still has a name, a history, and a practical role in the world, but these are understood as parts of experience rather than the final definition of the self. In ordinary waking awareness, identity is closely connected with the body. You feel located inside it, usually somewhere behind the eyes or within the head. Sensations occur in different parts of the body, but the observer seems to occupy a central position. The world is outside, and you are inside. This division is useful because the body has clear physical boundaries. Your nervous system must know which hand belongs to you, where your feet are, and whether an object is touching your skin. Survival depends on maintaining a reliable distinction between the organism and its environment. The experience of being located inside the body, however, is constructed by the brain. Signals from vision, touch, balance, hearing, muscles, and internal organs are combined into a model of where the self is. When these signals agree, the model feels stable. When they are altered, the felt location of the self can change. Virtual reality experiments, body ownership illusions, and certain neurological conditions show that people can temporarily feel located outside the physical body or connected with a false body. These effects do not prove that consciousness has left the brain. They show that the ordinary sense of location depends on sensory processing. Cosmic consciousness is described as something different from a brief body illusion. The person does not necessarily feel that they have moved to another position in the room. Instead, awareness may feel less localized. The body is still experienced, but it no longer seems to contain awareness in the usual way. Rather than feeling that awareness exists inside the body may feel as though it appears inside awareness. This change can be difficult to imagine because everyday experience strongly supports the opposite arrangement. You look out from the eyes, hear through the ears, and feel touch at the surface of the skin. It seems obvious that consciousness is somewhere inside the organism. Yet everything you know about the body also appears within experience. The sight of your hands, the pressure of the chair, the feeling of breathing, and the thought that this body belongs to you are all known within awareness. From the first-person point of view, awareness is never directly seen inside the body. The body is one of the things awareness knows. A person entering cosmic consciousness may begin to experience this distinction more clearly. The body remains important, but it is not experienced as the complete boundary of identity. Thoughts arise in the mind, sensations arise in the body, and perceptions arise through the senses, while awareness seems to remain unchanged by their movement. A strong emotion can appear without becoming the whole self. Physical pain can be present while another part of experience remains quiet. The personal story continues, but it is held more lightly. This does not mean the person becomes indifferent to the body or stops responding to danger. A healthy change in identity should not remove practical judgment. The body still requires food, rest, care, and protection. A person who claims to be beyond the body but ignores illness or walks into traffic has probably misunderstood something important. Cosmic consciousness, as described in mature contemplative traditions, does not reject ordinary life. It changes the relationship to it. The personal self becomes more like a role that awareness performs rather than the owner of awareness. An actor can enter a role completely while still knowing that the role is not the entire person. In the same way, someone may continue acting as a parent, friend, employee, or neighbour, while recognizing that these identities are temporary arrangements. They matter, and they carry a responsibility, but they do not define the full field of experience. This can reduce certain forms of fear. Much anxiety comes from defending a fixed idea of self. A criticism feels dangerous because it threatens the personal story. A change in status feels like a loss of identity. Aging becomes frightening because the body and its abilities are treated as the whole self. If awareness is experienced as more basic than these changing features, the threats may still matter, but they do not reach as deeply. Fear of physical pain and death may also change, although it does not always disappear. The body has strong survival systems, and meditation does not remove millions of years of biological development. A loud noise can still produce a startle response. Illness can still create distress. The difference is that fear may be observed as a process occurring within awareness, rather than accepted as proof that awareness itself is in danger. Spiritual traditions often interpret this as evidence that consciousness is not produced by the body. A person may feel that awareness existed before a thought appeared and remains after the thought ends. The same awareness seems present through childhood, adulthood, waking, dreaming, and moments of silence. Since the contents change while awareness appears constant, it can seem reasonable to conclude that awareness is independent of the body. The experience is important, but the conclusion is not scientifically settled. Continuity within a lifetime does not prove existence before birth or after death. The brain can create a stable sense of background awareness while its contents change, just as it creates a stable sense of the world despite constant movement in sensory signals. The feeling that awareness is timeless, may result from the fact that awareness does not contain an obvious image of its own age. A thought can be recognized as old or new. A memory can be placed in the past. The body shows signs of aging. Awareness itself has no visible wrinkles, no measured height, and no clear date of manufacture within experience. It may therefore feel unchanged even though the brain processes supporting it have developed over time. Neuroscience would describe cosmic consciousness by looking for changes in self-processing, attention, body representation, emotional regulation, and communication across large brain networks. Researchers studying long-term meditators have reported altered activity in regions associated with self-focused thought. Some experienced practitioners show less separation between brain networks that are normally more distinct. This may support an experience in which internal and external events feel less divided. These findings remain early and varied. Different meditation practices can produce different effects, and the same term may be used for several experiences. A person who feels calm and less self-focused for a few minutes may describe the state in the same language as someone who reports a stable transformation lasting for years. Scientific research must separate temporary states from lasting traits. A state is an experience that comes and goes. A trait is a more stable change in the way a person perceives and behaves. Transcendental consciousness may first appear as a state during meditation. Cosmic consciousness is described as a trait in which the underlying awareness continues through ordinary activity. The person does not need to close the eyes or withdraw from the world in order to recognize it. This continuity is central to the traditional description. During waking, the person notices that thoughts and perceptions arise in awareness. During dreaming, they may begin to recognize the dream as an experience occurring within the same awareness. During deep sleep, some claim that a basic witnessing presence remains even when ordinary content disappears. Awareness is therefore said to continue through all three common states. This claim is difficult to verify. Waking reports can be examined. Dream awareness can sometimes be tested through lucid dreaming, but awareness during deep sleep is harder to establish. A person may remember a sense of continuity after waking, yet memory can be shaped by expectation. The experience may have occurred during brief transitions rather than throughout the entire period of sleep. Even if continuous awareness during sleep remains uncertain, the waking aspect of cosmic consciousness can still be studied. A person may report a stable background of awareness during conversation, movement, and work. Their behavior may show reduced reactivity and improved attention. Physiological measurements may reveal changes in stress responses or brain activity. These findings would not prove that awareness is universal, but they could show that the sense of identity can become less narrowly connected with self-focused thought. The practical effects are more important than the label. If a person becomes less defensive, more attentive, and more capable of responding without automatic fear, the change has value regardless of whether it is described as cosmic consciousness, reduced ego identification, or improved regulation of attention. If the experience produces grandiosity, confusion, or a belief that ordinary rules no longer apply, it should be questioned. The term cosmic consciousness can easily encourage spiritual pride. A person may believe they have reached a superior state and begin treating everyone else as less developed. This is a clear sign that the personal self has found a new identity to defend. Instead of saying that I'm important because of my work, intelligence, or status, it now says that I'm important because I have transcended the ego. The content changes, but the structure remains. A stable reduction in self-identification should make a person less interested in proving spiritual achievement. Awareness does not need a certificate. The body and personality may still enjoy recognition, but those reactions can be seen without being treated as evidence of higher status. Genuine change is more likely to appear in patience, honesty, and the ability to listen than in dramatic claims. The sense of being beyond the body can also affect relationships. When identity is strongly personal, other people are experienced mainly in relation to the self. They're helpful, threatening, attractive, disappointing, familiar, or irrelevant. The mind quickly sorts them according to personal history and need. As self-focused activity becomes quieter, another person may be experienced with less immediate judgment. This does not mean that differences disappear. People have different personalities, values, and behaviours. Some actions are kind, others harmful. Clear boundaries remain necessary. The change is that another person may no longer feel completely separate at the level of awareness. Their thoughts and emotions are different, but the basic capacity to experience may seem the same. You cannot directly enter another person's consciousness. You know their experience through speech, expression, behaviour, and your own capacity for empathy. Yet you recognise that they also have an inner world. They feel pain, hope, fear, and attachment. Their life is centred around a self, just as yours has been. In cosmic consciousness, this shared fact may become more immediate. The person does not merely think that others are conscious. They feel that the same basic awareness appears through many individual perspectives. The bodies and minds are different, while awareness itself seems to have no personal features. This idea appears in many philosophical traditions. Some describe individual minds as waves in one ocean. Each wave has a distinct shape and movement, but it is made of the same water. Others compare consciousness with light passing through different windows. The windows shape the appearance, but the light is not owned by any one opening. These comparisons are not scientific evidence. They are attempts to describe an experience that is difficult to express in literal language. The central claim is that awareness may be universal, while individual minds provide local points of view. A physicalist theory can interpret the same experience without proposing a universal field. The human brain has systems for representing the self and distinguishing it from others. If activity in these systems changes, the boundary between self and world may feel weaker. Increased empathy, reduced self-focused thought, and altered body representation could create a strong sense of shared being. From this perspective, the experience is real, but its interpretation as universal consciousness is optional. The brain is not discovering that all minds are one. It is temporarily constructing identity in a less divided way. A spiritual interpretation says the opposite. It claims that the brain normally creates the appearance of separation, while cosmic consciousness reveals a more fundamental unity. The body and mind are real as local expressions, but they do not produce awareness. They allow universal awareness to experience the world from a particular position. The disagreement cannot be resolved by intensity of feeling. A person may feel completely certain that awareness is universal, but certainty is part of the experience. Science requires evidence that can be compared across observers and tested against alternatives. One possibility would be to discover effects that cannot be explained by known sensory or neurological processes. Claims of direct knowledge at a distance, shared thoughts, or awareness continuing independently of brain function would require strong and repeatable evidence. So far, such evidence remains disputed and has not produced a widely accepted scientific conclusion. Near-death experiences are often discussed in this context. Some people who come close to death report leaving the body, entering a bright environment, meeting deceased relatives, or experiencing a complete review of life. These events can be deeply meaningful and may reduce fear of death. They also occur under extreme physiological conditions involving reduced oxygen, changes in brain chemistry, medication, stress, and disrupted sensory processing. The fact that an experience occurs near death does not prove that consciousness is separated from the brain. It also does not make the experience unimportant. A person may undergo a lasting psychological transformation regardless of the physical explanation. Reports of seeing the body from above are especially relevant to the idea of a self beyond the body. Similar experiences can occur during seizures, migraines, trauma, sleep paralysis, and experiments that alter visual and bodily signals. The brain can produce a point of view that seems located outside the physical body. This supports the view that location is constructed, but it does not establish that awareness has actually travelled elsewhere. Cosmic consciousness is usually described as calmer and more stable than these sudden events. It is not an emergency or a break in normal functioning. The person remains oriented and able to act. The sense of being more than the body develops alongside clarity rather than confusion. The body may even be experienced more fully. When self-focused thought decreases, sensations can become clearer. Breathing, movement, and contact with the environment are noticed without constant judgment. The person does not reject physical life. They experience it as part of a larger field. This can create a different relationship with pleasure and discomfort. Pleasure can be enjoyed without the same need to hold it in place. Discomfort can be felt without adding as much resistance. The nervous system still responds, but the personal story around the response may be reduced. Consider a moment of physical pain. Ordinary thought may add fear, prediction, anger, and the belief that the pain should not be happening. These reactions can increase distress. A wider awareness may separate the raw sensation from the story. The pain remains real, but the additional mental struggle may decrease. This principle is used in some forms of pain management and mindfulness-based therapy. Patients are not told that pain is imaginary. They learn to notice sensation, emotion, and thought as related but distinct processes. This can reduce suffering even when the physical condition remains. The same approach can apply to emotion. Sadness may move through the body without becoming a complete definition of the self. Anger may be recognized early enough that it does not automatically control speech. Fear may remain present while the person acts according to values rather than avoidance. Cosmic consciousness, in its healthiest form, would support this capacity continuously. Awareness remains wider than the current state of mind. The person is not free from emotion, but emotion no longer covers the whole field of experience. The personal self continues to be useful. It remembers names, follows schedules, and understands social roles. A person in cosmic consciousness still responds when called. They do not need to explain that names are temporary constructions every time someone asks them to pass the salt. Practical identity remains available, while deeper identity is experienced differently. This coexistence is sometimes described as living on two levels. On the surface, there is the individual person acting in time. Beneath that activity, there is a stable awareness that does not appear to change. The person can move between tasks without losing the background sense of being. The word beneath is only a metaphor. Awareness is not physically located under thought. It refers to priority. Thought is no longer treated as the foundation of identity. It becomes an activity that occurs within something more basic. This may change the experience of action. Instead of feeling that a separate self is controlling every movement, action may seem to arise naturally from the whole situation. The body responds, words appear, and decisions are made without the same sense of strain. Skilled activity already has this quality. A musician does not consciously command every finger. An experienced driver does not calculate each movement. Training allows action to occur without detailed self-monitoring. Cosmic consciousness extends this reduced sense of authorship beyond specific skills. The person may feel that life is moving through the body rather than being controlled by a separate manager. This can be experienced as freedom, but it must remain connected with responsibility. Actions still have consequences, and the individual still participates in decisions. The belief that there is no personal doer can become dangerous when used to excuse harmful behavior. A person cannot reasonably claim that universal consciousness performed an action, and therefore no one is responsible. Social and ethical responsibility operate at the level of the individual, even if identity is experienced more widely. A mature understanding holds both levels at once. The personal self may not be the deepest reality, but it remains the level at which promises are kept, harm is repaired, and choices are made. Spiritual insight does not remove practical accountability. As the sense of separate identity weakens, Attention may become more open to the environment. Ordinary objects can appear clearer because they are no longer filtered as strongly through personal usefulness. A tree is not only shade, timber, decoration, or an obstacle to parking. It is seen more directly as a living structure with its own form and activity. This does not yet mean that the object is experienced as sacred. That belongs more strongly to the next level. In cosmic consciousness, the main transformation concerns the identity of the observer. The world may appear unchanged, but the person no longer feels entirely separate from it. There can be a strong sense of stillness behind movement. Cars pass, people speak, thoughts arise, and the body acts while awareness remains quiet. The quiet does not prevent activity. It provides a stable background in which activity can occur. This stability may continue during stress, though not perfectly. Old patterns can still return. Fatigue, illness, conflict, and fear may strengthen the personal self. A person may move in and out of recognition before the state becomes more consistent. Traditional accounts often describe years of gradual adjustment rather than one permanent event. The nervous system has spent a lifetime organizing experience around personal survival. It is unlikely to abandon that structure immediately. Even a profound experience can be followed by ordinary irritation, confusion, or the discovery that the kitchen still needs cleaning. Integration means allowing the insight to influence daily behavior rather than trying to remain in a special state. Over time, the sense of awareness as a separate witness may also begin to change. At first, the person feels that they are awareness observing the body and the world. This is wider than identifying only with thought, but a division remains. There is awareness here and the world there. The witness feels quiet and stable, while objects appear within its field. The next development begins when perception itself changes. The world is no longer experienced as something neutral being observed by awareness. Objects, people, sounds, and natural events may seem filled with the same consciousness that the person recognizes within themselves. The division between an aware subject and an unaware world starts to weaken. A face may appear unusually alive. A landscape may carry a strong sense of intelligence or presence. Ordinary details can seem connected by an underlying order. The person does not only feel that awareness is larger than the body, they begin to feel that awareness is expressing itself through everything perceived. Traditional language calls this God consciousness, though the term does not require belief in a human-like deity watching from outside the universe. It refers to a state in which existence is experienced as conscious, meaningful, and sacred, and in which the awareness once recognized within the self seems to shine through every form. When awareness is no longer experienced as confined to the body, the world may begin to look different even though nothing visible has changed. The same streets remain outside, the same people continue with their routines, and the same collection of cups, coats, trees, screens, and traffic lights fills ordinary life. Yet the relationship between the observer and what is observed begins to shift. In cosmic consciousness, the main change concerns identity. The person recognizes awareness as something wider and more stable than thought, emotion, memory, or the body. In the state traditionally called God consciousness, perception itself becomes more significant. The world may appear intensely alive, ordered, beautiful, or filled with a presence that seems to exist within every object and living being. Awareness is no longer felt only as the quiet background of personal experience. It seems to be looking back through everything that is seen. The word God means different things to different people, so it is important to be clear about how it is being used here. This state does not necessarily involve belief in a human-like figure located somewhere beyond the clouds, keeping detailed records and taking a particular interest in what everyone is doing on Sunday morning. Some traditions describe God as a personal being with intention, love, and intelligence. Others use the word to refer to the source of existence, the order within nature, or consciousness itself. A person entering this state may understand the experience through the religion they already know, but someone without a religious background may describe the same change as a sense of universal intelligence, sacred presence, or profound connection. The central feature is not the label, it is the experience that the world is more than a collection of separate and lifeless objects. A tree may no longer appear merely as wood, leaves, and biological activity. It may seem to possess a depth that cannot be reduced to its physical parts. The face of another person may appear unusually clear and vulnerable. Music may feel as though it reveals an order already present within the mind and the environment. Ordinary sunlight on a wall can seem important without any practical reason. The person does not merely think that existence is meaningful. Meaning seems to be directly present in perception. These changes can occur briefly during meditation, prayer, nature, music, love, grief, or extreme emotional events. Someone standing beside the sea may suddenly feel that the usual distance between themselves and the landscape has weakened. A parent holding a child may experience love as something larger than personal attachment. A person listening to a piece of music may feel that every sound is connected with something they cannot fully explain. Such moments may last only seconds, but they can remain memorable for years because they seem to reveal a way of seeing that ordinary attention usually hides. In stable God consciousness, according to traditional accounts, this quality is no longer limited to rare moments. The person begins to experience it throughout daily life. The sacred is not found only in temples, ceremonies, mountains, or carefully selected pieces of music. It appears in ordinary objects and ordinary people. Washing a dish, opening a door, hearing rain against a window, or watching someone prepare food can carry the same sense of presence. This does not mean that every task becomes exciting. A queue remains a queue, and a diligent train does not become efficient simply because the universe is being viewed with greater appreciation. The difference is that ordinary events are no longer dismissed as empty or separate from the deeper reality recognized in meditation. The experience is often connected with attention. Most waking perception is selective and practical. The brain looks for what is useful, threatening, familiar, or relevant to current goals. A chair is something to sit on. A face is identified as friend, stranger, colleague, or possible source of difficulty. A tree is noticed if it blocks the road, provides shade, or looks attractive in a photograph. This form of attention is necessary because the brain cannot process every detail with equal importance. It simplifies the world so that action can occur quickly. When self-focused thought becomes quieter, perception may be less controlled by immediate usefulness. The object is not seen only through its name and function. More detail becomes available. Color, shape, movement, texture, and relationship can appear with unusual clarity. The person may feel that the object has been seen for the first time, even though it has been present for years. This can produce a sense of wonder, not because the object has changed, but because the usual mental labels are no longer covering as much of the experience. Neuroscience can describe part of this change. Attention influences how sensory information is processed, and expectation shapes what the brain allows into conscious experience. When habitual prediction weakens, unfamiliar details may become more noticeable. Changes in brain networks involved in self-related thought may also reduce the constant division between what matters to me and what does not. Emotional systems can add a strong feeling of significance, while memory connects the present experience with ideas about love, beauty, nature, or the divine. This does not make the experience false. Every human experience depends on the brain, including ordinary perception. The fact that brain activity contributes to wonder does not mean that wonder is meaningless. Hunger involves the brain, but food still exists. Love involves hormones and neural systems, but relationships are not therefore imaginary. A scientific explanation of the process does not automatically settle what the experience reveals about reality. The more difficult question is whether the sense of sacred presence reflects something outside the person, or whether it is entirely created by the mind. A physicalist account would say that the brain is generating a powerful feeling of unity, significance, and beauty. The environment provides the material, but the sense that everything is conscious or divine comes from changes in attention, emotion, and self-representation. The person is seeing the same world through a different neurological condition. A spiritual account would say that ordinary perception is the limited condition. The brain normally divides reality into useful objects and hides the deeper connection between them. When personal thought becomes quiet, the person does not invent sacred presence. They become capable of noticing what was always there. The world seemed ordinary only because habit had reduced it to labels and functions. Both interpretations agree that perception has changed. They disagree about whether the new perception is more accurate. The feeling of certainty cannot answer this question on its own. Dreams, drugs, and neurological conditions can produce experiences that feel completely convincing. A person can feel watched, guided, chosen, or connected with hidden forces without those beliefs being supported by evidence. Strong meaning can be generated by the mind, especially when emotional and predictive systems become unusually active. This is why God consciousness must be discussed with care. A healthy sense of sacred connection should not be confused with losing the ability to test reality. If a person feels greater love for others, greater patience, and more respect for life while continuing to function clearly, the experience may be beneficial. If they become convinced that ordinary rules no longer apply, that every coincidence contains a private message, or that they have been given unquestionable authority over other people, concern is justified. The brain is naturally designed to detect patterns. This ability helps us recognize faces, understand language, predict danger, and learn from events. It can also produce patterns when none exist. A number appears twice, a song plays at a meaningful moment, or someone says a word connected with a private thought. The mind may treat the coincidence as evidence of a hidden plan. Sometimes the connection is useful or emotionally meaningful. Sometimes it is simply chance. In a state of heightened significance, coincidences may feel unusually powerful. The person can begin to believe that the environment is communicating directly with them. Spiritual traditions often warn against becoming distracted by these experiences. The goal is not to collect signs or build a special identity. The deeper transformation is supposed to reduce self-importance, not place the individual at the center of a cosmic system of messages. A practical test is to examine what the experience produces. Does it support humility or superiority? Does it increase compassion or make the person dismissive of others? Does it improve judgment or weaken it? Does it allow uncertainty, or does it insist that every private impression must be true? A mature experience of sacredness usually comes with greater care and less need to prove anything. The word sacred originally points towards something treated as worthy of deep respect. In God consciousness, respect may extend beyond selected religious objects to life as a whole. Another person is not merely a role, opinion, or obstacle. They are experienced as a conscious being whose inner life is as real to them as yours is to you. An animal is not simply a moving object. A forest is not only a supply of material. The body is not merely a machine to be used until it becomes inconvenient. This wider respect can influence behavior. If the same basic awareness seems present in all living beings, cruelty becomes harder to justify. Compassion is no longer only a moral rule learned from society. It may feel like a natural response to recognizing oneself in another form. Helping someone else does not seem entirely separate from helping oneself, because the boundary between the two has weakened. This idea appears in many religious and philosophical traditions. Some teach that each person carries a divine presence. Others say that consciousness is one reality appearing through many minds. Some describe creation as an expression of God rather than an object separate from God. The language differs, but the practical conclusion is similar. How a person treats others reveals how deeply they understand the connection they claim to experience. The experience may also change prayer. In ordinary religious practice, prayer can feel like communication between a person here and a divine being elsewhere. In God consciousness, the distance may seem smaller. The person may feel that the awareness praying and the presence being addressed are not completely separate. Prayer becomes less like sending a message and more like resting attention within a relationship already present. For someone without religious belief, the same shift may appear as gratitude, openness, or a direct sense of participation in existence. The person may not use the word God at all. They may speak of nature, reality, life, or consciousness. The emotional quality can still include reverence, humility, and care. Beauty often becomes central. A face, landscape, piece of music, or ordinary object can seem more beautiful than before. This is not only about physical attractiveness. Beauty may be recognized in age, damage, imperfection, and change. A worn hand can reveal years of work. A decaying leaf can reveal the process by which matter returns to the soil. A crowded street can reveal thousands of private lives moving together. The person may begin to notice that beauty and loss are connected. Something feels precious partly because it will change. A sunset matters because it does not remain. A relationship matters because time is limited. The body matters because it is vulnerable. God consciousness does not necessarily remove sadness. It may deepen sadness while reducing resistance to it. This can be confusing because spiritual states are often imagined as permanent happiness. In reality, a wider awareness may allow a wider range of feeling. Joy can be stronger because the person is less defended. Grief can also be stronger because connection is felt more deeply. The difference is that emotions move through awareness without completely destroying its stability. Compassion can become painful when the suffering of others is more clearly recognized. News, conflict, illness, and injustice may be harder to ignore. A person may feel connected with life but overwhelmed by how much pain life contains. Mature traditions therefore combine openness with balance. Compassion must be joined with practical action and the ability to rest. Feeling every problem continuously would not help the person experiencing it or anyone else. The sacred view of the world should not become an excuse to avoid difficult facts. Illness still requires treatment. Harmful behavior still requires boundaries. Injustice still requires response. Saying that everything is divine does not mean that every action is acceptable. A person can recognize a shared field of consciousness while still distinguishing kindness from cruelty and truth from deception. This is where spiritual language can become dangerous if it is used carelessly. Someone may tell a suffering person that their pain is part of a perfect plan, or that they created their own illness through incorrect thinking. Such claims can add guilt to pain and remove responsibility from those who could help. A sense of sacred order must not replace compassion, evidence, or practical care. God consciousness, as a healthy state, does not deny the physical world. It does not require pretending that loss is pleasant or that every event has an obvious purpose. It changes the way events are held within awareness. The person may trust that life has depth without claiming to understand every cause. The sense of divine presence can also influence creativity. Artists, musicians, writers, and scientists sometimes describe ideas as arriving through them rather than being produced by deliberate effort. After long preparation, a solution appears suddenly. A melody forms, a sentence arrives complete. A scientific connection becomes clear after the conscious mind has stopped forcing the problem. In God consciousness, this natural experience of inspiration may become more constant. Action feels less like personal production and more like participation. The person still practices, learns, and works, but the final result does not feel entirely owned. This can reduce pride, although the ego may also claim special access to inspiration if given the opportunity. The body may be experienced as an instrument through which a larger intelligence acts. Speech, movement, and creativity arise within awareness without a strong sense of personal control. This resembles the reduced authorship described in cosmic consciousness, but now the process is felt as meaningful or guided. Life does not seem random. It appears organized from within. Science can explain some of this through unconscious processing. The brain combines information outside awareness and presents the result when it is ready. Skilled action becomes automatic through practice. Emotional systems mark certain events as meaningful. None of these explanations requires an external intelligence. The spiritual interpretation says that intelligence is not confined to the individual brain. The order seen in biology, physics, and consciousness reflects a deeper intelligence expressing itself through nature. The person experiences creativity as cooperation with that larger order. Again, the experience cannot settle the theory. It can show that the sense of personal authorship is flexible. It can reveal that meaning changes perception. It can inspire ethical action and creative work. Whether it proves a divine intelligence remains a philosophical question. The natural world often becomes an important source of this perception because it displays complex order without obvious human control. A seed becomes a plant, cells organize into tissues, birds navigate across continents, and ecosystems maintain relationships between countless organisms. Science explains these processes through evolution, genetics, chemistry, and physics. A sacred view does not need to reject those explanations. It may see the explanations themselves as part of what is remarkable. Understanding the mechanism can deepen wonder rather than remove it. Knowing how a star produces light does not make the night sky less impressive. Knowing that music depends on vibration does not make a melody meaningless. Knowing that love has biological foundations does not prevent it from changing a life. The choice between science and sacredness is often created by people, not required by the facts. God consciousness can therefore include scientific curiosity. The person does not need to stop asking how things work. They may become more interested because every process seems connected with the same underlying reality. The structure of a cell, the development of a brain, and the movement of galaxies become different scales of one existence. The risk is that wonder can be used to fill gaps in knowledge. When an explanation is incomplete, it is tempting to say that a divine force must be responsible. History has repeatedly shown that gaps can close as evidence improves. A more careful approach allows mystery without pretending that mystery is proof of a particular answer. The experience of sacred presence may be real as an experience, valuable as a guide, and uncertain as a theory. These three facts can exist together. A person can respect what happened without making claims that exceed the evidence. They can allow the experience to change how they live while remaining open about what it means. Over time, the division between sacred and ordinary may disappear. At first, certain moments feel filled with presence while others feel routine. A meditation, a forest, or a piece of music seems divine, while washing clothes and answering messages seem merely necessary. As the state becomes more stable, this difference weakens. The same awareness appears during every activity. A difficult person may be recognized as another expression of consciousness without their behavior being approved. A damaged object may be seen as part of the same material process as something beautiful. Noise, silence, movement, and stillness all occur within one field. The sacred is no longer a special quality added to selected experiences. It is the basic condition of experience itself. At this point, a subtle separation still remains. There is awareness recognizing the divine in the world. There is a person who sees sacredness, and there are objects through which sacredness appears. The relationship has become intimate, but there is still a relationship between two sides. The final movement begins when even this distinction becomes difficult to maintain. Awareness is no longer experienced as one reality looking at another reality filled with divine presence. The observer, the act of seeing, and the object being seen are understood as one process. The person does not merely feel connected with existence. The idea of being a separate thing connected to something larger begins to lose its meaning. In that condition, the sacred is not located within objects and does not belong to an observer. There is only the whole event of experience without a clear boundary between the one who knows and what is known. This is the transition from seeing the divine everywhere to recognizing that there may never have been a separate viewer standing outside it. The movement from God consciousness into unity consciousness begins when the last remaining division in experience becomes difficult to maintain. In the previous state, awareness seemed to recognize the same sacred presence in people, animals, objects, and natural processes. The person still experienced themselves as someone who was seeing that presence, even if the distance between observer and world had become very small. Unity consciousness is described as the point at which this structure gives way. There is no longer a separate awareness looking at a meaningful universe. The observer, the act of observing, and the thing being observed are experienced as one continuous event. This does not mean that physical differences vanish. A hand remains different from a table, one person remains different from another, and walking into a wall continues to provide convincing evidence that practical boundaries deserve respect. The change concerns the feeling that consciousness belongs exclusively to a private individual standing apart from everything else. Ordinary waking awareness divides experience automatically. There is a subject here and an object there. The subject sees, touches, remembers, chooses, and reacts. The object is whatever appears before it. This arrangement is so basic that language is built around it. Someone performs an action upon something. A person sees a tree, hears a voice, feels the wind, or thinks about a problem. Even when a person says that they feel connected with nature, the sentence still contains two sides. There is a person, and there is nature, with connection acting as a bridge between them. Unity consciousness is described as the recognition that this bridge may have been unnecessary because the division itself was never as complete as it seemed. Consider the act of seeing. Light reaches the eyes, electrical activity travels through the nervous system, and the brain constructs an image. The object being seen, the body doing the seeing, and the conscious experience of sight appear together in one process. You never experience a world completely separate from awareness, and you never experience awareness without some relationship to the world, the body, or the mind. The division between an inner observer and an outer reality is useful, but from the first-person point of view, both sides arise within the same field of experience. Unity consciousness is said to make this fact immediate rather than merely intellectual. A person can understand the idea without experiencing the state. They can agree that the brain constructs perception, that the self is a changing model, and that every organism is part of the same physical universe. These conclusions can be reached through science and philosophy. Unity consciousness refers to something more direct. The usual sense of being a private center of awareness weakens so thoroughly that experience no longer seems to belong to anyone. Seeing occurs, hearing occurs, thought occurs, and action occurs, but the extra claim that a separate owner stands behind these events may be absent. This does not necessarily produce a dramatic feeling. Accounts sometimes describe intense joy, light, or overwhelming love, but others describe the state as surprisingly ordinary. The room looks like the room. Sounds continue at their normal volume. The body performs familiar actions. What has changed is the assumption that all of this is happening to a separate self. Experience remains, while ownership becomes less convincing. The word unity can suggest that many things have been physically combined into one object, but that is not the intended meaning. A forest remains a collection of different trees, plants, animals, fungi, soil, water, and air. The differences do not need to disappear for the forest to function as one system. Each part exists through relationships with the others. A tree depends on light, soil, water, microorganisms, and the atmosphere. Its body is continually exchanging material with its surroundings. The boundary around the tree is real enough for identification, but it is not absolute. The human body works in the same way. It appears to be a separate object, yet it is continually exchanging air, water, heat, food, and microorganisms with the environment. The atoms making up the body have existed in other forms and will move into other forms. The nervous system depends on conditions outside the skin. Language comes from other people. Identity depends on relationships, culture, memory, and a world that existed before the individual was born. From a biological point of view, no organism is completely independent. Life is organized through exchange. Unity consciousness may include a direct sense of this dependence, but the traditional claim goes further. It suggests that awareness itself is not divided in the way individual minds appear to be divided. This is where the idea becomes scientifically uncertain. Each person seems to have a private experience connected with their own brain. Your thoughts are not automatically available to someone sitting nearby. Damage to one brain affects the consciousness associated with that person, not everyone else. These observations strongly support the existence of individual centers of experience. Spiritual traditions respond that individual minds may be separate in their contents, without being separate in their underlying nature. They compare minds to openings through which one field of awareness is expressed. Each opening provides a different view, while the capacity to experience is fundamentally the same. The metaphor can help describe the claim, but it does not prove it. Science has not established that a universal field of consciousness exists, or that individual brains receive awareness from it. A neurological explanation takes a more cautious approach. The brain normally creates a boundary between self and environment. It represents the body as mine, thoughts as mine, and perceptions as happening from my point of view. If activity in the systems maintaining this boundary changes, the division may weaken. The resulting experience can feel like complete unity, even if consciousness remains a product of one brain. Research into meditation, psychedelic states, certain seizures, and other altered conditions has shown that the sense of self can change dramatically. Networks involved in autobiographical thinking, body representation, attention, and the distinction between self and world can become less dominant or communicate differently. People may report that their usual identity dissolved and that experience continued without a clear center. These findings show that the self is flexible. They do not show whether the experience of unity reveals the ultimate structure of reality. A change in brain activity can explain how the sense of separation weakens, but it does not automatically prove that separation is either real or unreal at the deepest level. The distinction between experience and interpretation remains essential. A person may genuinely experience no boundary between self and world. Afterward, they may interpret that experience as contact with God, recognition of universal consciousness, a change in the brain, or a combination of these possibilities. The experience can be authentic while the explanation remains open. This caution does not remove the value of the state. Unity consciousness can challenge habits that create unnecessary suffering. Much of ordinary distress depends on maintaining and defending a rigid personal identity. The mind compares itself with others, protects its image, resists change, and treats every event as a statement about personal worth. When the self is no longer experienced as a fixed center, these reactions may lose some of their force. Criticism may still be uncomfortable, but it is less likely to threaten the entire identity. Success may still be enjoyed, but it does not need to prove that the person exists or matters. Failure may provide information without becoming a permanent description of the self. The body still feels pain, but pain is not automatically joined by the belief that reality has personally selected this individual for unfair treatment. This wider perspective does not eliminate emotion. A person in unity consciousness can feel sadness, anger, affection, and fear. The difference is that emotions arise within a field that is not completely defined by them. Sadness can be present without creating a separate self made entirely of sadness. Anger can provide energy for action without requiring hatred. Fear can protect the body without controlling every decision. Compassion may become more natural because the suffering of another person no longer feels completely unrelated. This does not mean that one person literally feels every sensation occurring in another body. It means that the division used to justify indifference becomes weaker. The same basic vulnerability is recognized in every living being. Each person wants safety, avoids pain, forms attachments, and tries to preserve a sense of self. When this recognition is intellectual, compassion may feel like a moral duty. When it is experienced directly, helping another can feel as natural as protecting part of one's own body. The hand does not debate whether the foot deserves assistance after stepping on something sharp. The organism responds because the parts belong to one system. Unity consciousness extends this sense of participation beyond the individual body, at least at the level of experience. Ethical behavior becomes an important test. A person who claims to experience oneness but treats others carelessly has not translated the insight into daily life. The language of unity can be repeated while the ordinary ego remains fully active. It can even become a new form of superiority. Someone may believe that they understand reality while everyone else remains trapped in ignorance. This is a familiar risk in spiritual communities. The personal self can claim ownership of its own disappearance. It announces that it has reached the highest level, becomes attached to being seen as advanced, and reacts defensively when questioned. The content is spiritual, but the behavior follows the same old structure of comparison and self-protection. A more mature expression of unity is usually quieter. The person may have less need to describe their state because the practical effects matter more than the label. They listen carefully, admit uncertainty, and remain willing to correct mistakes. They understand that insight does not make the nervous system perfect. Old habits, emotional reactions, and blind spots can continue. Unity consciousness does not remove the need for psychological development. A person can have a profound experience and still carry unresolved trauma, poor communication habits, or harmful beliefs. The experience may create an opportunity for change, but integration requires time. Relationships, work, and ordinary responsibilities reveal whether the understanding has become stable. The state can also be misunderstood as passivity. If everything is one, someone might ask why any action matters. Why resist harm, protect the environment, or help another person if all events belong to one reality? Traditional responses usually point in the opposite direction. If separation is less absolute, harm matters more, not less. The suffering of another is not dismissed as someone else's problem. Unity does not mean that every event is equally desirable. A healthy body is one system, yet the immune system still responds to infection. Cooperation includes the ability to protect the whole from harmful processes. In human life, this means setting boundaries, preventing abuse, correcting injustice, and accepting responsibility. The person acting from unity may oppose harmful behavior without turning the person responsible into a completely separate enemy. This is difficult because the nervous system is designed to simplify threats. It divides the world into safe and unsafe ally and opponent. A wider awareness can recognize harmful action clearly, while also understanding that the person causing harm is shaped by fear, history, biology, and social conditions. Understanding does not require approval. Compassion does not require allowing continued harm. Unity consciousness should improve the ability to hold these facts together rather than replacing judgment with vague acceptance. The experience of free will may also change. In ordinary awareness, the self feels like an independent author, making decisions from a private center. Earlier in the journey, we saw that thoughts and impulses often arise before conscious choice. The brain processes information outside awareness and presents actions, ideas, and explanations after much of the work has already occurred. In unity consciousness, action may feel as though it arises from the entire situation, rather than from a separate controller. The body moves, words appear, and decisions form through the interaction of memory, perception, values, and current conditions. There may be less tension around authorship. The person still participates, but they do not feel isolated from the process producing action. This can create ease, particularly during skilled or compassionate behavior. The right response may appear without extended internal debate. A person listens, understands, and acts. The absence of excessive self-monitoring allows intelligence already present in the system to function more freely. Care is still required. The feeling that actions happen by themselves must not become an excuse. Society operates at the level of individual bodies and minds. Promises are made by people, laws apply to people, and consequences must be addressed by people. Even if the separate self is understood as a model, that model remains part of the causal world. The self is not removed from practical life. It is placed in context. It becomes a useful interface rather than an absolute identity. You still use a name, protect the body, remember appointments, and decide what to have for dinner. Unity consciousness does not prevent ordinary preferences. Someone may recognize oneness with existence and still prefer one type of tea, which is probably fortunate for the tea industry. The difference is that preference no longer needs to become division. Liking one thing does not require hostility toward everything else. Having an opinion does not require turning it into a permanent identity. The personal mind remains functional without being treated as the center of reality. Time may also be experienced differently. The personal self is built through memory and anticipation. It tells a story about where it came from and where it is going. When identification with that story weakens, attention rests more fully in present experience. The past remains available as memory, and the future remains available for planning, but neither dominates the same way. This does not create a magical state outside physical time. The body continues aging, clocks continue moving, and deadlines remain impressively resistant to spiritual insight. The change occurs in psychological time. The mind spends less energy living inside remembered events or imagined futures. The present is no longer a narrow point trapped between what has gone and what has not arrived. It becomes the only place where sensation, thought, memory, and anticipation actually occur. A memory of the past occurs now. An image of the future occurs now. The sense of a continuous personal journey is constructed through events appearing in current awareness. Some traditions describe this as timelessness. The term can sound supernatural, but the experience may result from the reduction of mental measurement. When thought is not constantly comparing the present with before and after, time feels less central. Minutes still pass, but they are not continually counted. The same applies to space. The body remains in a location, yet awareness may not feel located in the usual way. Sounds arise at different distances, objects occupy different positions, and movement continues, but the center from which all of this is experienced becomes less defined. Experience is not organized as strongly around a point inside the head. This can produce a sense of openness. The person may feel that awareness has no clear edge. The field of sight ends where vision ends, but awareness itself is not seen to have a boundary. A sound arises and disappears without entering a visible container. A sensation appears in the body, yet the knowing of it does not have a measurable size. Spiritual interpretations treat this absence of a perceived boundary as evidence that awareness is infinite. Neuroscience would be more cautious. The brain may simply lack a representation of the limits of consciousness. You cannot see awareness in the same way you see an object, so it naturally feels without shape or edge. Once again, the experience is clear while the conclusion remains uncertain. Unity consciousness may reveal universal awareness, or it may reveal what happens when the brain stops constructing the ordinary boundary of the self. These possibilities are not easily separated from within the experience. Philosophy offers several ways of approaching the problem. Materialism says that consciousness depends on physical processes and ends when those processes end. Idealism sees that consciousness is fundamental and that the physical world appears within it. Other views suggest that mind and matter are different expressions of a deeper reality. Unity consciousness has been used to support all of these positions, but no private experience can establish a complete metaphysical theory by itself. What the state can establish for the person is that the ordinary sense of separation is not permanent. The self can become quiet without consciousness disappearing. The body can remain functional while ownership becomes less central. Perception can continue without a strong division between subject and object. This discovery alone can transform the way life is approached. A person does not need to decide whether universal consciousness is scientifically proven in order to live with less defensiveness and greater care. They can recognize that the personal story is partial, that perception is constructed, and that every individual exists through relationships with a larger world. Unity can therefore be understood at several levels. Physically, every body is made from the same kinds of matter and depends on the same universe. Biologically, life is organized through exchange and interdependence. Psychologically, the boundary of the self is constructed and flexible. Ethically, the well-being of individuals is connected with the well-being of communities and environments. Spiritually, awareness may be experienced as one reality appearing through many forms. These levels do not need to be confused. Scientific unity does not automatically prove spiritual unity, and spiritual experience does not replace scientific evidence. They can still support a similar practical insight. Separation is useful, but complete independence is an illusion. The 7 states we have followed show a gradual change in the relationship between awareness and identity. In deep sleep, the ordinary self disappeared along with most reportable experience. In dreaming, the mind created a world and a temporary self inside it. In waking awareness, the self became stable through the body, memory, language, and social roles. In transcendental consciousness, awareness was recognized when ordinary thought became quiet. In cosmic consciousness, that awareness appeared to remain while thought and activity returned. In God consciousness, the same presence seemed visible throughout the world. In unity consciousness, the difference between inner awareness and outer reality was no longer experienced as final. This progression should not be treated as a ranking of human worth. A person who has unusual meditative experiences is not more valuable than someone who has never heard these terms. Consciousness changes for many reasons, and spiritual language can create expectations that do not match reality. The model is most useful as a way of asking questions. What is the self made from? Can awareness exist without thought? How much of reality is constructed by the brain? Does consciousness belong only to individuals, or is individuality one expression of something more fundamental? The honest answer is that some of these questions remain open. Neuroscience has learned a great deal about sleep, dreams, perception, memory, attention, and the construction of identity. It can show how changes in the brain alter the sense of self and world. It has not yet explained why subjective experience exists, or whether consciousness is fundamental. Spiritual traditions provide detailed maps of inner experience, but their interpretations cannot simply be accepted as scientific fact. Different traditions disagree, and the language of direct experience can be shaped by culture and expectation. Still, these traditions have spent centuries observing the mind, and some of their practical methods have produced measurable changes in attention, stress, and emotional regulation. The most reasonable position may be one of disciplined curiosity. We can take experience seriously without treating every interpretation as proven. We can respect science without pretending that current science has solved the mystery. We can explore awareness without trying to force it into a dramatic state. Unity consciousness is not something that needs to be imagined while listening. The effort to produce a special experience would only create more mental activity. A simpler approach is to notice what is already happening. Sounds are appearing. Sensations are present. Thoughts may be commenting. Breathing continues without requiring a separate manager. Notice whether you can find a clear boundary where awareness ends and the sound begins. The sound has a location, but its presence is known immediately. Notice whether a thought announces its arrival before it appears. It forms, remains briefly, and changes. Notice the body as a collection of sensations rather than a single fixed object. Pressure, warmth, movement, and breathing arise in different places. There is no need to conclude that all existence is one. There is only the opportunity to observe how the sense of separation is being constructed now. The mind names, divides, compares, and organizes. These abilities are useful, but they may not reveal the whole structure of experience. The quiet witness that began this journey may now appear less like a private observer. If every thought, sensation, and perception is known within awareness, and the observer itself cannot be found as a separate object, then the question of who is watching becomes less straightforward. Perhaps awareness belongs to the individual brain. Perhaps the individual brain shapes a wider consciousness. Perhaps both ideas are incomplete. Whatever the final explanation, the person listening now is not exactly the same arrangement of thought that began listening earlier. Sensations have changed. Cells have exchanged material. Memories have been formed, and attention has moved through several ideas. The self has remained useful, but it has never been still. You may continue to call this changing process I, as everyone does. The word is practical, familiar, and much easier than explaining the construction of identity whenever someone asks how you are. Yet behind the word is a living system connected with every part of its environment, aware of a world that the brain is continually helping to create. Perhaps unity consciousness is the recognition that this connection was present before it was noticed. The body was never separate from nature. The mind was never separate from language, memory, and relationship. Experience was never divided into an observer and a world as completely as it appeared. The room around you may feel ordinary, and that is perfectly suitable. Unity does not require the room to glow or every object to announce its deeper significance. It may be enough to recognize that the sound, the body, the thought, and the awareness of them belong to one event taking place now. Wherever you are listening from, the same basic mystery is present. A living body receives signals from a world, a brain organizes those signals, and an experience appears. Within that experience, a person asks what consciousness is. The universe, through one of its living forms, has become capable of examining its own awareness. Whether that awareness is produced by the form or expressed through it remains unanswered. The question stays open, not as a failure, but as an invitation to continue observing carefully. Thought can offer theories, science can gather evidence, and spiritual practice can examine experience from within. Between them, the quiet fact of awareness remains present, knowing each idea as it arrives and releasing it when it passes. For now, there is no need to hold on to any conclusion. The personal story can rest without being rejected. The body can soften while continuing its steady work. Sounds can come and go without requiring explanation. Thought can slow when it is ready. The sense of being someone may remain, as it should for ordinary life, but it does not need to stand apart from everything else. It can be recognized as one perspective within a reality that is still being understood, one temporary form through which existence becomes visible, audible, thoughtful, and aware.